All right, this is a virtual meeting using the Zoom platform. Members of the public can view this meeting live on Channel 8 or the city's website. Live Spanish translation services are being provided for tonight's council meeting by telephone. Please dial 720-386-9023 and use code 104091#. If you are a council member, please be sure to have your video camera on and be mindful that we are streaming this meeting on Channel 8 and on our city's website. The chat function is disabled to ensure that the public can see all portions of the meeting. The city clerk is the host of the meeting, and I and our IT staff will be the co-host. Council members and panelists will be able to unmute themselves when recognized. Please mute yourself when you have finished speaking. Remember to lower your virtual hand to prevent disruptions. As a reminder, we will use roll call votes only where required by law or when requested by a council member or the clerk. Other votes will be voice votes counted by raising hands in the Zoom app or as the chair determines. If a member disagrees with the stated outcome of the vote or feels that their vote was not properly heard or is not recognized, the member should immediately request the Mayor Pro Tem's attention. At this time, I'm going to call the study session to order. We're going to start with presentations. Our first presentation is on City Council meeting procedures. So I'd like to invite Robert Sheasley, City Attorney, to make the presentation.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and members of council. Thanks for this opportunity to talk about procedures again. I know this is something that the council has asked for. As you noticed in the script, we talk about voting and et cetera. That's for later in the meeting when you have your GID board meetings, because you're not voting because it's a study session, right? So starting with procedure right away. Council requested this meeting procedure. We've done this in the past and we did it during the orientation. And so I'd really like to run through the presentation unless people don't want me to at all and prefer to focus on the questions that council has. I'd like to give a little refresher and because I think that's where we're going to spend most of our time valuably. And I want to start with the caveat that unless they're in your policies as kind of a mandatory thing, these are largely guidelines to make sure that and to know that if you're not strictly adhering, in some cases, we don't want to use these as a tool to game people, right? We don't want procedure to be a way that you get one over on the other side that didn't understand what was going on in these meetings, because everybody knows that's going to work out. We're going to end up back in the meeting 2 weeks later redoing the thing in some way frequently, and it's just not fair. And so. The goal of all these procedures is to make sure that you do arrive at your decisions in every meeting through a respectful dialogue, but in a clear way so that everybody understands what's happening. Everybody on council had the opportunity to participate if they desired, and that the public can understand and also at least respect the process, if not the outcome of your decisions. And also it's important that you all come out the other side as a board in a positive way. So Dylan, if we could have the presentation, please. And then please talk over me if you have a question on anything in particular as we're going through this, if that's okay, Mayor Pro Tem, for people to interrupt. You're granting authority for people to interrupt me. Okay, so we'll do the first slide. A lot of this is background and what you already know. Council meetings have their time set by ordinance, something you can change. A new change to your rules is that the mayor or 3 members can call a study session with 24 hours written notice. And then quorum to do any meeting is a majority in office. And obviously there's open meetings law apply to just about any meetings you do. I'm not gonna run through open meetings law issues here though. Are there any questions about how meetings get scheduled before we move into agendas? I'm just going to keep going and talk to me and I'll come back. So next slide, please. On meeting agendas, as you know, it's laid out in your council policies how typically meetings run. We amended this last week. The city manager tends to set that based on input from council at prior council meetings and study sessions. And obviously council through a motion at a meeting can put an item on an agenda. Specifically under our recent amendment, obviously, council members can bring up appropriate things at administrative council business, but the new policy recommends and kind of requests that you do so by the Tuesday before a meeting. If you do want it to appear on the agenda, you do have to do it on the by that Tuesday before the meeting with your additional materials for it. The idea behind that being that council members will have an opportunity to prepare for the question that you want to put in front of the council. The risk being that if you don't, and it's not a last minute thing that's kind of excusable, council members may say, good idea, I like it, let's push it to the next meeting until we can have a time to stew on it a little bit. And then obviously one of the big additions is that you can put supplemental materials on meeting agenda or meeting packets if you know something is coming up, unless it's quasi-judicial. So for example, our oil and gas is a great example of that. Oil and gas ordinance, legislative matter. Councilmember Noble had some additional citations that she wanted to include. Any council member can do something like that. Next slide, please.
Robert, Councilwoman Noble had her hand.
Yes.
Yep. Thanks very much. When it says that council members can add something to the agenda, are you saying that that requires a vote of the council to agree to it? And how does it?
Yes.
And then also, how does an agenda get changed? Say we have a lot of items on the agenda, but
Sure.
some things should be removed.
Sure. So the city manager sets the agenda. And so if there are too many things on the agenda in leading up to a meeting, the city manager may say, we're going to move these few things off. Maybe at a study session the week before, talk through the agenda with council. The city manager has the discretion to do that, to move things so you have a more flexible meeting agenda. And I know the clerk and the manager are monitoring meeting times more now with the time limit. Council members can individually place items like a presentation or an ordinance on the agenda or a resolution without a vote of the council, or create a study session item without a vote of the council. Where council members individually can do things is as an administrative business item. I hope that answers that question.
But you need to do that by the prior Tuesday?
To actually have it included in the agenda so the clerk can manage the packet, yes. However, as we all know, the mayor surveys council and opens up the floor during administrative council business, and anyone can bring something up at that point.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. So on our agendas, everybody knows how they run. And one of the changes made by the policy committee, or recommended by the policy committee that you all adopted, was that citizen communication would start no earlier than the time stated in the agenda. So if we have a URA meeting before that runs quickly, or an executive session, something that happens before, and then we come into the meeting, we can handle it in one of two different ways. The citizen communication can be heard and then we move on with the agenda, or we either wait, or we wait until we do other business that we can handle that night, and then do citizen communication at the stated time so people don't miss it. And typically the way it runs, as we know now, citizen comment and then consent agenda. Then we do resolutions, first reading ordinances, and then second reading ordinances that are controversial or significant or aren't passed unanimously. It's pretty much the standard for that. And then we do admin business, and then reports for people to report back on the committees they're assigned to, as well as any conferences or city-sponsored things that they attended. And then as far as amending the agenda, in addition to doing it before the meeting, at any point during a meeting, and it's not a spot on our agenda, but I believe a motion to amend the agenda to advance an item earlier, or to move an item off of an agenda to a later date, would be appropriate from the council. If the meeting looks too busy, or there's something coming up later that you know is really important, you could amend it. The public knows when the meeting starts, and legitimately everything after that point is fair play. Things can be taken entirely out of order with the council's approval.
Okay, Councilmember Alan Thomas.
Yes, thank you. I'm just a little confused too, Robert, with the new forms too that was provided to the mayor and the mayor pro tem and city council. Do we have to complete that form as well first with another council person to have something placed on the agenda also?
That is correct. Thank you. I need to look at that form. I'm not familiar with it. I do believe that is about the administrative business item that's meant to get concurrence so that the item is useful. Again, it can also be brought up at a meeting And you may just not get the support there. If your intention is to just make the motion and bring it up, that's one thing. But to actually, if you want to really move policy forward, that pre-submission of a form, so staff and other council members can be prepared, and having the concurrence of somebody else almost guarantees you a second on your motion when you get there. It helps advance policy beyond that stage at 10 o'clock at night when we get to it and people are tired and don't know what's going on.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Sure. So on the next slide, I just want to mention council acts by motion. Everything council does that is official is a motion. How that action is presented, though, could just be in that verbal motion. It could be in a written resolution, or it could be in an ordinance. That's in an ascending level of importance. Nothing else, one or two council members suggesting something, isn't the direction of council. And I want, and staff may perceive kind of the trend of council at a meeting, but I want council members to be really aware that if you have a suggestion and it doesn't get incorporated into something, it may be because it wasn't made by motion at the appropriate time. Or you may wonder why you made a comment and then the next speaker was recognized and your item got passed over. It's because you didn't say, I'm making a motion to do X, Y, or Z. And so it's really important that if you want council to take a position on something, to firmly to state this is the policy of council, you need to do it by motion. And of course, that's if it's not a study session. In a study session, you're not taking action, but you're giving consensus to guide the creation of policy that you will then approve by a future action. And so I just wanted to make that's a really important thing. And the rest of this presentation is largely about motions. And you should know, as you're looking to whether your motion is going to be approved, you want to consider, do I have a majority of votes? And a simple majority of the council members present, which could be a minimum of 5, is all it takes to pass a motion in a lot of cases. Except executive sessions require 2/3 of everybody present. Emergency ordinances require a majority of the members, or no, sorry, now I'm getting lost a little bit. I believe it's 7. New tax ordinances imposing new taxes, you don't need to be worried about, but that's a larger requirement. Zoning decisions contrary to planning commission. One that's not listed here is ordinances on second reading or final reading. All have to be approved by a majority of council members in office at the time the vote is taken, as well as motions on the city manager's appointment and employment. And then some other motions, more procedural motions, like moving the previous question or limiting debate, things I've seen once in my time as city attorney here, somewhat recently actually. Those do require larger than a simple majority. And by the way, we tend to write those in the script so you can be aware of kind of what approval level is required for a particular motion that we know is coming in the meeting. So next slide, please. Before we get into motions, I just want to note, again on decorum, council policies 16 and 23 were amended to talk a little bit more about the order of proceedings and how council members interact with each other. I won't go over those again, but decorum matters, as we all know, especially on Zoom, because we're not in front of each other. And so we don't want to have stilted conversation, but we want to act in a way that make sure that we're being clear, that we're making quality decisions, and that we're acting in a legal way. And that's how you interact among each other, how you interact with staff, how staff interacts with you, how you interact with the public. We can't necessarily govern much of how the public interacts with council. There are rules for how you can conduct yourself in a meeting, but how council responds to the public is very important in the perception internally among the staff and among the public. Your nonverbal actions and any sidebar discussions that you can't really have right now, even though technically you're all in my sidebar at this moment. It's too early for jokes. And those are things that would lead people to think you're being distracted and not giving the credit that the matter deserves. You're not giving it the level of importance that it deserves. Next slide, please. So this is just how motions work generally. Somebody makes a motion. I move to do ABC. At that point, you're looking for a second. The person who made the motion, if there's no second, could modify the motion. They could withdraw the motion kind of at any point throughout. If a second is required, and some don't require a second, then the matter would proceed to debate. After the second, at any point, the maker can modify or withdraw the motion at any point after that. It doesn't need the seconder to approve it. Sometimes it's done. It doesn't hurt to say, does the seconder approve the modification? Because you'll frequently say the city attorney will annoyingly interrupt and restate your motion for you, right? The seconder doesn't have to approve that technically. What you'll hear then is the chair restating the motion. It's very important that you listen to make sure that the chair restates the motion as you said it and as you intended, because that is what is going to guide council's debate and is going to be the matter that's being voted on and what will be recorded in the minutes. Now, sometimes he summarizes it a little bit and it is clarified in the minutes typically for non-controversial motions, but we want to pay attention to what the actual motion is. And it'll probably be restated before a vote. After that, you have the debate, other motions that may be made, amendments, et cetera. Those motions get resolved before the primary motion. Your move to do A, B, C, somebody could move to amend it to do A, B, and D. You'll vote on the amendment to do A, B, and D first, but you're not approving the whole thing. And it doesn't obligate you to vote on the motion. And then it comes back to vote on a motion as it was amended. So the original motion may not exist as it was before. Very high level, but that's the process of what you should see. On the next slide, please, we want to focus when we're making motions on doing one thing. I know that a lot of times you lead into a motion with an explanation and a sentence or two is fine, but if you have a brief written to argue in favor of a motion and at the very end you tack on your motion to do your thing, it's going to be very hard for people to have followed because people may check out by the end of your explanation. So I would recommend saying very simply why you want to do something or just moving to your motion. And the motion should be one thing, maybe one or two related things if they can, but you don't want to have a motion to do a whole laundry list of stuff. One, it's hard to keep track of. Two, people may disagree with a whole bunch of things in there, but they like one thing. So you want to have a clear and simple motion so that you have a fair and open process. If you are amending it and moving to amend it, you can ask first for a modification of the motion, but you don't want it to be super complex because an amendment doesn't change the original purpose of the motion. And so I would just be careful to avoid wanting to amend something. I moved to do ABC and you ask somebody, well, will you change it to do 1, 2, 3? It's something this is not very helpful as far as examples go, but you want to keep it as simple as possible. Always ask for help from me, ask for help from the chair. There's a presenter involved that has details on staff. That person could assist you in phrasing it. My favorite, as you have all heard from me, is to call me before. If you know something's coming up on an agenda and you want to make a motion on something, or something's not on an agenda and you still want to make a motion about something, call me and ask me how to phrase it. Because I want to make sure you're on target, that you're hitting the mark, and that if it's appropriate, I can get other people involved that may have some way to help you with your motion. And I will give you assistance in both how to say it, how to phrase it, and maybe some justification for it.
Councilmember Alan Thomas.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I was just curious too, Robert, because I don't see it in the presentation, but at one time I believe the mayor had requested that at some point we were going to have the wording come across as what the motion was. Is that still in the process of being implemented? I think it was, at one time, I think he was saying it would be typed up what the motion was right before we actually voted on it.
Sure, that was his suggestion to investigate it. I spoke with the clerk about it, and Dylan, if you're here and want to chime in, I believe that the answer was there's not a tool within the Zoom format and the way we're doing meetings now to do it, and even live it would be difficult. You would likely need to have a Word document open with a shared screen and then be typing the motion as you go, and then it would have to keep up with all any amendments or changes that gets made, which is extremely difficult to do. When they're writing up the minutes, I know they frequently go back and will listen to the tape over and over to get the language right. I would recommend, if you are unsure of what the motion is, asks the chair to restate the motion so that
Oh.
everybody is clear. You are never, and that's a point of order, essentially. You could ask for that again, and that means you can interrupt. You don't have to wait. If he says, okay, all in favor, raise your hand, or all in favor, clerk, call the roll. Interrupt right away. Unmute yourself. Say, Mayor, can you please restate the motion? That way, everybody's on the same page, and you're probably not alone, right? There are other people that may be wondering. So.
Okay, thanks. And then one other question: do we have discussion after the motion and second, then discussion, but not before the motion or the second?
It depends how. So again, this is not the tightest of ships. If we know generally what the substance is going to be, somebody made a motion, we want to have the motion made first, typically. Now, sometimes our meetings go into kind of a free-form discussion on some issues, but you want to use the motion to frame what the discussion is. So that is the issue being discussed. So preferably it comes first. We don't talk about, and when it's a resolution or an ordinance, we have the motion to introduce it before we talk about it. Because that motion means, first off, that it's something that council cares about and wants to do. Two people on council want to do it. So we shouldn't talk about it if two of you don't even want to bother talking about it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Sure. And then on the next page, we're not going to spend too much time on this. Types of motions. Your main motion is going to be the kind of primary thing that frames the debate. And then after that, you have all these procedural items. Obviously, you can see some of these come up early. We're not going to hold people super accountable to postponing an item on an agenda if there hasn't been a motion to approve it yet. You could move a resolution to another meeting, et cetera. These are generally in order of priority, which means you have to resolve some first. And so these are things you could do. Indefinite postponement is basically saying, we're not taking this thing up. If it's a resolution or an ordinance, it's dead. If it comes back, we'll renumber it. And that could be if we don't know when it's coming back or if we want it to come back at all. Essentially, our oil and gas ordinance in, whenever we first moved it off was postponed indefinitely. And as opposed to dying, I believe. As opposed to being voted down. It's a way to vote something down in some ways without voting against something because it's not ready yet. So you could move to postpone ordinance, whatever, indefinitely, and that vote would then take care of the whole issue. Obviously, amending it, referring to committee, which we tend to call study session, postponing to a certain time is when you know that it just needs to be baked a little bit more, or you want to have more time to debate, somebody's absent, you want more publicity out there for the public. That's an appropriate motion there. We don't tend to get into these next two, limiting or extending debate or calling the question. Obviously, if debate's gone on too long and everybody's had a chance to speak and people are repeating themselves, calling of the question and the motion has been made, which is why we have to have the motion done first so people know what they're debating on. This will get us to the point of voting. And then laying on the table is essentially setting something aside during the meeting to take up at a later time. So if you're in the middle of, somebody was late for a presentation, you take up another item, you're working on it, that person shows up and is ready to make their presentation, you move to lay the current item on the table to then take it up after that next item. It's just a matter of setting something aside. Tabling is not postponing indefinitely. It's just meant to literally set something down so you pick it up again later in the meeting. Again, I can come up with all of these things if you tell me kind of what you want to do. You say, City Attorney, I want to figure out a way to give us more time to look at this issue. I will tell you to postpone it to another meeting if there's time available on that meeting. So, on the next slide, just a note on amendments. They have to relate to what we're talking about, to what that primary motion is. If we're talking about a swimming pool, we can't move to talk about something related to the police department, that sort of thing. Also can't change the meaning of the motion. We only want 2 motions pending at one time so we don't get lost. And I want everybody to remember that if you're voting on an amendment, you're not approving the main motion. You're just changing the motion that you will ultimately vote on. And then on ordinance amendments on the next page, ordinances and resolutions have to be amended really specifically. We saw this with the oil and gas ordinance, and I hope we can move forward in a model like this. What we've done in the script now, when you have an ordinance before introduction, because a lot of ordinances that council's seen them in study session, they like them, they're happy with them. But sometimes, and we've done a few lately, that some council members may want to take a stab at officially changing. You know, study session is about consensus. It doesn't always come out as you expect, or you may have heard from people, you may have heard from the public hearing, something different. It's an opportunity, we want to give that opportunity to amend it before it gets introduced, or that motion on approval. So we have the motion, the ordinance presented, or the resolution presented. We typically don't script it for resolutions because there aren't too many of these where you'd want to amend it. But where we think an amendment might be likely, we'll have the chair ask if any council member wants to offer an amendment before it gets introduced. And we can do that on second reading as well, before the motion to introduce on first reading, or the motion to approve on second reading. And you can do so at either time. So you can, and you don't have to amend it at first reading if you're comfortable enough with it, but know that you may want some amendments on second reading. You could approve it, introduce it on first reading, and then at second reading, have the real strong debate. Some councils don't do anything but vote on introduction and approval on first reading. They don't really discuss it. They don't have they may have some debate, but the real fireworks and the real discussion happens on second reading. I tend to think there's some waste of time in that. If you're paying attention and are looking at these and something's stuck with you and you want to offer an amendment, call me to work with me on how you might word an amendment, and we can put it in the packet so everybody has a chance to stew on it and think about it. We can work with the appropriate staff outside of the city attorney's office if there are other alternatives to get something as you like it. And so that way everybody understands what's going on. And we want the text to be really specific because, as you know, some of these ordinances can be very lengthy in the code, especially, and the wording really matters. And the wording is related in between sections oftentimes. And so we don't want to adjust it willy-nilly. And so that's very important. Also with amendments for ordinances and resolutions, if something comes up in an evening that you didn't think of before, you really want to work on an amendment, but you know it's going to need a couple tweaks to it, you may want to postpone the whole ordinance until some amendments come up. So, or you can just do it on second reading. So there's a lot said in there, but the key here is specificity and kind of getting to it early to make sure we have the best possible product. Next and close to final section on privilege motions. Basically, any of these motions, somebody makes this motion, we have to stop doing what else we're doing and resolve that motion. If you can make a motion to adjourn at any point, then we have to resolve that before we finish our business, that sort of thing. Or setting another time to adjourn. We have that established in our ordinance already. Privileges don't require a second. They're also not subject to debate. You get to interrupt who's speaking, and then the chair rules on that question of privilege, which could be that person's microphone isn't working. You know, we interrupt and say, hey, so-and-so, we can't hear you all the time. You don't need to do this super formally. If you don't like what the chair says, you can appeal it. If we're in appeal territory, then we're in I have to consult a book. I have a cheat sheet somewhere, but there's council can vote to overrule what the chair says as far as a question of privilege, which could be maybe the order of speaking. It could be the room is too hot or too cold, but that's all in your control at the moment. And so not so much to rely on here for us, because I do think we continue to operate at a level where we don't need to rely on a high level of procedure to get along and to know what we're doing. So I think getting into this depth is unnecessary for our board. On the next slide, a quirky thing is when you want to reconsider something, if you're in the same meeting and you want to reconsider an action you took, only if you are on the winning side can you move to reconsider an action. The second can come from either side. And then what's done then is you vote on the motion to reconsider, and then if that passes, then you go back and reconsider the question again. So you can agree to go back and reconsider something, but still vote the same way you did before. And then some other things we don't do often that I would not recommend, they're not common, are rescinding or amending something previously adopted. These are kind of more technical. If we're going to be repealing something that we did, we're going to do it a little more formally in something written. We don't often put things on the table, so we don't take them from the table. And I would need to check if there are any special rules to this. Now, if you, there are various procedural rules related to this. If you are considering something that was not adopted again, same rules don't apply. So kind of bringing up things again is something that I believe is appropriate for the board to do. You could, move to rename the city on a weekly basis and get shot down each time, but you're allowed to keep doing it, in my opinion. I'm not saying that you should.
Sorry, Robert. Councilmember Noble had a question.
Thanks. So on the motion to reconsider, we had this discussion sort of regarding while we were having the oil and gas debate. And from one week to the next, an issue that we had already voted on was raised again the second week, not as a formal or, not as a formal motion. It had not been put in our packet. It didn't start in our packet. It didn't show up in our packet on second reading. And it was raised by someone who was on the losing side. So explain to us how that was justified again.
Sure. So we were not reconsidering an action. I'd be happy to go and detail it through the rules, but we were not reconsidering an action taken at the same meeting. The same or similar motion to amend the oil and gas ordinance, as I recall, was made. Essentially a second bite at the apple on second reading. I did not feel was inappropriate under those rules. It's not like reconsidering. If we made that motion a second time that night, there are two things related to that. If you'd made it the second time that night, first you would have to make a motion to reconsider. And to make that motion to reconsider, you would have had to have been on the winning side. And then you would have voted on that motion again. At a later meeting, that is not the same as reconsidering at the same meeting. The meeting had adjourned, and so we started over.
So my reading of Robert's Rules of Order on that issue, it was a particular name you gave it. What was that again?
Motion to reconsider, or
no, it was the other.
To rescind or amend something previously adopted?
It was, I can't remember. That wasn't, I can't remember what it was called. But at the time, I looked it up in Robert's Rules of Order. And the person who is making the motion at the second meeting needs to declare at the first meeting that they intend to do so, that they're going to bring it back. I'm going to bring this back. It didn't win. My side didn't win, but I'm going to bring it back next week. Or next time we vote. And then if that person, if that person had not made that announcement at first reading, then it requires a 2/3 vote, not a simple majority. It is allowed if you don't note it at the meeting before, but it would require a 2/3
to even bring
majority.
it up.
Yeah, for the vote, for it to have passed at second reading, it would have required a 2/3 vote. So
I would be happy to look into it. Yeah, to clarify what it is. Yeah.
Right, because it's complicated. And the whole point of Robert's Rules of Order is to manage decorum. And as you said at the beginning, to not catch people off guard and not surprise your colleagues and not take advantage of these rules, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that we need to clarify. Because sure. If it's something that is totally legal, then you're right. It could happen again and again and again. And that isn't the idea of Robert's Rules of Order. If something to do it that way, you're supposed to take care of it.
Sure. I would be happy to look at that one and see. I think it's important to remember our council isn't strictly governed by Robert's Rules of Orders. It's not adopted as the formal rules. We use it as a guide and a reference. And so my default as the parliamentarian is if everyone, and in this case, everyone was present, if it can be fairly considered and reviewed, then the democratic process suggests the importance of allowing it to happen. But your point is well taken. I will look at that. I want to make sure that we are operating closer to these and to know where those boundaries are, because we were in the middle of one ordinance. Circumstances between meetings can change. And so bringing up an issue between weeks or, 6 months, if you started on council and you're in your first meeting, made a motion, are you never allowed to make that again? I kind of like to know what those boundaries are, but thank you. I will look that up and see what that intermeeting capacity is.
Right, because you had said to me that I could hold my amendments till the second,
Yes.
to the second reading, which was, but I had written amendments in the agenda. It was in the materials, and I just didn't do it because we went so darn late in circles.
Sure.
Anyway.
Yeah, and our having those written was helpful. It's certainly not required, and anybody could, and they were your amendments. Anybody could have introduced them, to be honest, as they were in the packet, kind of.
Right.
But okay, but I will look at that. Thank you.
Yeah, because I just want to make it clear to my colleagues that we had the discussion about my amendments and or whoever those amendments belong to, and they could have been done on the first one or the second one.
Sure.
I would advise people in the future not necessarily to do it on the second meeting because of the way that we work culturally.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's a great idea. One of them did go through, but I don't think that's a typically a great idea.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you.
Sure.
Councilmember Hurst.
It was your motion, Councilmember Hurst, so take it easy here.
I actually,
I didn't name names though.
no. I agree with you, Councilwoman Noble. I actually think, though, that it's commonly practiced, at least in my experience, that a verbal dissenting view and a no vote is the same as stating your intent to bring the topic back up in the next meeting, in the second hearing. If you continue on your position, then you're basically continuing it from there. You voted no against it. You had a verbal dissent against it. That issue is not over for you, obviously. And so, if we want to formalize that, it makes sense to me. But I don't disagree. Like if we don't say anything in first reading, you can't all of a sudden change that in second.
You can continue.
Yeah, I will look into it and see where we go. Now the last slide, and then you all be free of procedure for a moment. Some previous procedural tools, we've talked about these. I do want to note the middle two, as well as point of personal privilege. Point of information, which you can raise, ask a question. It's not to offer more information and to substitute yourself for the person who's providing information. So point of information is to clarify your understanding about something. It's not to say there's not a clever way of asking that, for sure. At point of information, I understand X, Y, and Z. Tell me why I'm wrong. So it may work. A point of order also raises that procedural issue or a rule violation. A point of order typically is going to be waived if not raised. And so we will know better the next time, but for taking the oil and gas, the fact that point of order was not raised at that point meant that it was appropriate to continue. For that not having been caught. Obviously, if it's an error, I should catch it as well. But we don't allow it for people to correct statements by other people. Somebody says the sky is blue, you don't get to point of order or point of information. Either way, the sky is not blue, it's green. You don't get to use that tool to talk to each other. It's kind of your way to talk to the chair and to ask a question of the parliamentarian. So again, I have not seen us coming up with any of those. So I think we're in good stead there. I remember I said I was going to focus on your questions and run through this quickly. It's 6:40. I don't know that I ran through it quickly, but I'm happy to answer any other questions. And we can drop this presentation off the screen. Okay.
Doesn't look like there's any more. Thank you.
Excellent. Please call if you have any questions.
Councilmember Hurst.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a question for you, Robert, but just as a whole, as a council, I just kind of wanted to not just move right on to the next topic, see if we can at least have a brief discussion about where to go next with that, because honestly, none of it matters if we're not going to hold everybody accountable to them, hold each other accountable to these rules or these changes. I think they're all really good, or at least have a really good intent. We have to let them play out in certain situations. But we have to agree that we can't also, or at least in my opinion, we have to agree that we can't put parameters around every situation. There's going to be things that we're not covering here. And so, so in some way, shape, or form, kind of noticing that, that this isn't perfect, that, we almost have to have that in there as an agreement to each other, because we have to hold each other accountable to these rules and all the changes. Having that type of standard is great, but I think it can be forgotten quickly in the heat of the moment. And so I just wanted to have a discussion about these changes. I mean, we just heard about all the clarification points and things like that, but what does everybody else feel about that? Because this, to me, can't just die after this presentation.
Mr. Tinklenberg.
Thank you, ma'am. Just a comment about the form that Councilmember Alan Thomas referred to earlier. That was generated a number of years ago, and then over time it fell out of use. It's intended to be an aid, basically, to help clarify what individual council members are looking for or proposing. And so if it doesn't work for you, please let us know and we can modify it. But again, it's meant to help you in both clarifying your thought and clarifying what you're intending to bring up for the rest of council and for staff. So again, it's meant to be a tool. So just let us know if it doesn't work for you.
Thank you. Councilman Guardiola.
Thank you. Hey, Roger, is there any way we could make it into a form, not a Word document? Sometimes on the iPad, it's hard to work on Microsoft Word. And I know me and you have talked about it, but wouldn't it be simpler just to make it into a form? We use Survey Google Forms at DPS, which has 92,000 students. But I just think it'd be a lot easier, because I was looking at it today on my iPad, and it was hard just to type in. I have, and if it was just an easy form that went to a net, it's just make it a lot easier. Just my suggestion on that. It's a little rough to type on Microsoft on iPad. So
Sure, we'll explore that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from council? All right.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to our next presentation, which is the Veterans Local Government Management Fellowship. At this time, I would like to invite Armando Guardiola, Human Resources Director, to make the presentation.
Good evening, council. Can everybody hear me? All right, I'm going to get started for time's sake. I just wanted to come forward with this new presentation as far as the new program that we'll be implementing. We believe we'll be implementing on third quarter, so I'll just get started. We are going to try a little bit different. I have a 2-minute video. We haven't tried it on Zoom as far as doing it during a study session, so I hope it works. If not, I'll go through the presentation. It should be a short presentation. If you have any questions, you can stop me, or we can wait till the end. So I'll get started. So I will be talking about the Veterans Local Government Management Fellowship Internship Program is what we're calling it here at the city. So we'll get into a little bit more details. Next slide. Hey, Dylan. Okay, here we go.
I met with Scott, started telling my story a little bit about my struggles. Scott read my resume, and he gave me some feedback on my resume, and then I think we started getting into a conversation. It was like, how do we keep veterans from having the same struggles that I'm having? And Scott, being from a more positive perspective, how do we get veterans into local government?
When I met Darren, I think, he has this background in special forces as a Green Beret. For a local government manager who's not used to the military side, they might, or a recruiter, they might immediately write off someone like him thinking, Rambo, right? Going through the jungles with the machine gun. And that's a really unfair and inaccurate sort of depiction of what they do. And when you really get down into the weeds of what these guys do, it is, I always keep coming back to it, it's about problem solving, right? And it's about the people side of the business. So when you're someone who's been a major and you've had a lot of personnel issues you've had to deal with, just like a city manager, you've got personnel issues you deal with, you've got logistical issues you deal with, you've got planning issues you deal with, strategic planning issues you deal with. Boy, all sorts of issues. Man, that's the same kind of stuff I deal with. And I found that when we're open to that idea, oh man, we get some phenomenal people.
Every time we bring a veteran in, we change the hearts and minds of that government. They get a chance to see how competent they are, the skill sets, the skills, education, and experience that they have does translate, and so it helps the next person that much more.
The biggest thing that I'd say the value that it brought was a foot in the door. How do you become more than just a resume on the pile, applying for local government positions, and a very unique resume on the pile? And so how do you kind of get that foot in the door and get the opportunity to show your stuff and attach a name to a face and really demonstrate that the skills and experience that you gained in the military were translatable and were of value to local government service. And the fellowship absolutely brought that to me.
I think I ultimately want to see a relationship between municipalities and military installations, build these partnerships where they're helping each other. And as military service members start transitioning out of the military and looking for a second career, that there's a strong relationship between the military installations and the local governments where they appreciate how military service translates, is relevant to local government.
Thank you, Dylan. If we can go back to that presentation, Dylan. So that really sums up my presentation, but I will go into a couple more slides. So just kind of an overview. So the Veterans Local Government Management Fellowship Program is a 16-week program. And really we're kind of excited to try it at the City of Commerce City. It's fairly new, but we will be providing a lot of coaching, management training, hands-on experience to service members who are transitioning into the public. So that is something new. A lot more to come. Go ahead, next slide, please. It is collaboration with ICMA and the Department of Defense. It does provide them, or they do provide service members that have that are officers and senior level. So we are getting individuals with bachelor's and master's. So the tasks that we're going to be putting them through is a little bit high level, dealing with directors, city manager's office, and more of our senior level employees. Like I said, it is a 4-month, 3 cohorts. Right now, we're going to take on 1 cohort starting the 3rd quarter, and it'll transition into 21-22. And it's an opportunity to shadow and work alongside senior leadership. I did talk about that. Dylan, can you go to the next slide, please? So city responsibilities. So it is no cost to the city, but they do get paid by the Department of Defense. There's no obligation to hire the individuals, but it does give us an opportunity to see good candidates and see what, working for the city is like, or introducing them into civilian life. It provides senior level mentoring and coaching. So they do provide a coaching plan that I do have my team working on right now. So we'll provide some mentoring and coaching. I'm also asking for other departments and directors to be involved. We have developed a work plan, and the work plan, I do have a little teaser, or at least an example of the work plan on the next slides, and you guys can take a look at that. And it also allows them to pursue their interests. So what I did like about it is, for example, we actually get to look at their resumes. So they apply for these positions. It's an applicant that is applying to our internship program or the Veterans Local Government Management Fellowship. So we get to screen these individuals, and I'll give you an example. Say we're looking at we have an individual that has a bachelor's in accounting, and I know Cheryl has the next membership that's coming, or the next fellowship internship that is coming in. So she can hire that individual and maybe has a project that has to deal with high level accounting. So we get this individual that does have that background, and we can give them these higher end projects to assist us. So it's a good opportunity. We're testing it, so more to come. Go ahead, Dylan, please. So I'm going to go over a little bit, like I said, about the work plan, the teaser. So it is onboarding for 4 weeks. Here's a quick breakdown, and the next one I'll give you the example. So onboarding and orientation. So the first one will be housed with human resources. So it'll be 4 weeks, would be a full onboarding and orientation program that we've spent some time kind of creating. It's attending city council, interviewing city council members. They'll be rotating with directors 2 to 3 days each, and that's on a 4-week period. And then they ultimately will go into an HR program, which is a 4-week program. For example, with HR right now, we're actually expanding. One of our work plans is to do the internship. We'd like to get involved eventually, maybe see what it'll take to get into community colleges, if we can go out and recruit. That's a plan. So that's a project that I'm looking at that I'd eventually probably hand that off and be part of it and mentor it and see if we can establish that program. And then there would be department rotations for 4 weeks, kind of getting to learn the city, the types of departments. A lot of individuals that come from the private sector don't understand our departments. When I first came into local government, I didn't understand there was public works, there was community development, and what functions they did. Next. Here's an example of what we've already, part of the plan. For example, I won't go into full detail, but at least the first one, for example, week 4, that is department head rotation. So we were going to be asking all directors. I've already presented this to leadership, and they'd have 1 to 2 days either dealing with the director or the division managers, kind of shadowing, attending meetings, kind of learning what learning what the city does as far as that department. So it's an opportunity. As you can see, we have it all planned out all the way for the 16 weeks every week, what they're doing, mentoring. And then I do have that 4-week plan where they're going to be working on a specific program or project that, for example, HR, we're expanding that internship. Next. Any questions?
Councilmember Alan Thomas.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I don't specifically have a question, but I just wanted to tell you, thanks, Armando. I think this is a really great program, and I hope it's a big success in Commerce City to see, giving back to our veterans, who fought for our freedom. So thank you, and I hope it's a big success.
Thank you. We need all the good kudos to us, all the good vibes, make sure it works.
Councilmember Madera.
So how do you recruit for these positions?
So we actually work with ICMA, and they give us a pool of individuals. Right now, the first cohort that we should be starting in 3rd quarter was actually, we're going to be the guinea pigs, HR is. So I'm going to look for someone that probably has some project management. So they'll give me a list of all individuals that have applied from the Department of Defense to ICMA. They have a pool, and then they'll send me all those individuals. We'll look through applications, we'll look through resumes, and that's how we select them. So there's a pool that comes from ICMA with all these individuals. It's Buckley. The majority of these individuals will be coming from Buckley, Colorado Springs, but they can come from anywhere. But obviously it'll be a lot easier to recruit like from Buckley and Colorado Springs.
Okay, awesome. And the other thing, is this something that you can maybe present on our Veterans Commission? I feel like a lot of them are from Buckley and the local bases, and I just think it'd be a good opportunity to spread the word on that.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. I know John is working with ICMA for the pool, but I think it'd be great for us to showcase it and kind of go over it. So I'll definitely I'll have John put us on the agenda. I could definitely give the quick presentation for them. I think it'd be a good idea.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Councilmember Noble?
And also piggybacking on Councilmember Madera's comment to introduce the fellow to the Veterans Commission, have him get a chance to attend a meeting and participate.
Okay. I'll take note and I'll make sure we get all this done.
Yeah.
Is there any other questions?
I can't unmute. It looks like a great program. So thank you. Thank you.
Okay. It doesn't look like there's any other.
There is some references
Sarah?
on the back of
What?
the presentation. There's references, some links if you guys want to take a look at those for more information. Otherwise, if you have any other questions, just send an email out to me and I can get those answered.
Okay, I did want to tell you, Armando, when, for my job, I've done a lot of training on how to get veterans into the workforce. And I think this is absolutely fantastic because so many times they have the skills, but it just is basically worded different on their resume because they're coming from a military type background, but they have the skills. It's not that they lack the skills. And so I'm really excited that we're doing this as a city.
So I'm glad you brought that up. So the last week we're doing kind of like a HR orientation, like interviewing. I mean, these individuals are senior level, but I think looking at resumes. So I do have my team building on that because I think that would actually help out. So transition those same tasks that make sure they look like, going to the civilian life and making sure that they connect. So thank you. That's a good idea. We have that like the last week of it. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right, so now we'll move on to the presentation for Parks, Recreation, and Health Advisory Committee Annual Update. At this time, I would like to invite Dylan Gibson, City Clerk, to introduce the presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and I guess just Mayor Pro Tem and members of council. My script's messed up. Tonight, we have an annual update from the Parks, Recreation, Golf Advisory Committee. And before we begin, I'm going to provide a bit of background and overview for you, as this is the first presentation of its kind that's coming before you this evening. Since I've started with the city, and I'm sure before my time here as well, there's been a desire by council members, both past and present, board and commission members, and staff liaisons to have more frequent communication between council and your boards and commission members. Historically, only a few boards and commissions have had consistent annual updates to the city council, such as the Quality Community Foundation. The City Council Boards and Commissions Subcommittee has had consistent feedback during interviews with existing board and commission members seeking reappointment that the members felt as though they get appointed and then they don't really hear from council too much or know if the work that they're doing is meeting council's goals and expectations for that board or commission. Additionally, some council members have expressed interest in meeting or hearing from their boards and commissions, especially your advisory commissions, on their work in the community or input on certain topics as they come before council. As such, Deputy City Clerk Jordan Roberts, along with the Boards and Commissions Council Subcommittee and the staff liaisons, have worked to create an annual update program that allows most board and commission members to come before council, or board and commissions to come before council. So, for example, tonight we have the PRG Advisory Committee presenting, and then next year they'll be presenting again in April and the year after that. And next month we have the QCF scheduled to present on their annual update, and they'll present every year in May after that. Now, not every board and commission member is going to be coming, our board and commission is going to be coming before council. The Planning Commission and Zoning Board of Adjustment, as quasi-judicial boards, will not be making annual updates to council. The goal of these presentations is to allow representatives from each board and commission to make an annual update to council. And these updates will focus on the work that the board or commission has accomplished in the previous year, what the board and commission is working on to accomplish for the upcoming year, and allow council to provide feedback and weigh in and ask questions of your board and commission members on an annual basis. If council has any feedback for staff on this format, the information provided, or any other comments related to these annual updates, as this is our first one, please let us know so the future ones we can make sure that the presentations are meeting your goals and providing you with the information that you desire. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brett Walker and Justin Millay, the co-chairs of the PRG Advisory Committee, to give the annual update. Brett and Justin, please let me and Jordan know when you'd like us to move forward to the next slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dylan. Good evening, Council. Thanks for having us. We're very excited to be here. So it's been a long time coming, and we're very excited to share with you guys kind of what we've been working on. My name is Justin Mayette. I'm one of the co-chairs along with Brett Walker, and I'll let him introduce himself here in a second. I've been involved with this group really since about its inception, 2016, I believe. And just love it. It's a great group to be around, and happy to be involved. Brett, do you want to introduce yourself really quick?
Sure. Thank you, Justin. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and all other council members. Thank you for the opportunity for allowing us to present. Justin and I have been co-chairs for about 3 years now, a little more than 3 years actually. So we've seen a lot of different things through this time, so we appreciate the time with council.
All right, so we'll get going right into our presentation here. You can go ahead to the next slide there. So we just wanted to give you guys an annual update. So first, we're going to talk about our purpose. So the purpose of the Parks, Recreation, and Golf Advisory Committee serves as a voice of the public and advises the city on issues related to the planning, construction, regulation, maintenance, repair, and operation of city-owned and/or controlled parks, golf, and recreation amenities and facilities, open spaces, programs, and services. Providing our feedback is very, very valuable, and given our input, we feel like is very valuable. And this is a great platform to do that. Next slide, please. So we actually have 13 total members, which is the largest number we've had, which is great. So I just want to introduce everybody. We have Clark Berggren, Mary Hogan Chan, Delilah Collins, Alejandro Garcia, Councilman Guardiola, Josh Hode, Councilman Hurst, myself, Justin Mayette, Sean McDowell, Kendall Ryerson, Adam Vinanzi, Brett Walker, co-chair, and Paul Wielander. So really, really great group of people on this committee. Next slide, please. So earlier this year, we had quite a large number of new people. So we wanted to have a conversation with everybody on, why are you guys interested in this? Why did you join this committee? So I'm going to give you guys just a high level summary of our discussion. One thing was to understand the different needs for parks, recreation, and golf programs and services in the northern and southern neighborhoods of Commerce City. How can we determine how to effectively bring these neighborhoods together? How can we bridge those gaps and provide balance between the north and the south? Involvement in senior programs. One person mentioned, for the active seniors in our community, they would like to see more active programming, including outdoor activities, outdoor pickleball courts, outdoor tennis courts in the neighborhoods. One person mentioned to keep the neighborhoods to the east and west of Highway 85, the Henderson area, involved. They kind of sometimes get forgotten out there. So how do we keep them involved in parks, recreation, and golf? This was kind of a big one with all of us. The connectivity of trails, paths, and bike lanes to all city amenities is very important with this group. So we'll be talking about that more this year. Next slide, please. And we want to help promote the benefits of parks, recreation, and golf. This committee can really help put Commerce City on the map as a leader in parks, recreation, and golf. So we're striving to do that. We want to be, our committee really wants to get involved. We've talked a lot about it, and we're starting to finally see some things happening, but we want to get involved in any special event, where we can help come out and number one, help with the event, which is always needed, and then just, help represent our committee and the city as well. And it's really our civic duty, to serve our community. We live in this community. Let's take it to the next level and serve in this community. It's a great opportunity for us to provide feedback and make recommendations as a citizen. And some of us really wanted to learn and understand how a city operates, specifically the Park, Recreation, and Golf Department. And we've learned a ton. I've learned a lot in 5 years, just on how the department operates, and also other city departments too. Next slide, please. So just a couple of our 2020 highlights, and then I'm going to turn it over to Brett here. Obviously we had a challenging year with COVID. We tried to conduct as many virtual meetings as we could. There were a few months there where we weren't able to, but we always maintained, ongoing communication amongst ourselves and also with the city staff. One really awesome thing we did is we participated in the Smart Approach to Cost Recovery program. So it was an exercise where we ranked, basically all the service categories and went through the service sustainability model update. And I think the members really felt like they were able to give their input and help with that program. So that was a really good one. We were able to review the 2021 capital improvement plan, and we recommended the Frontera lights at safety, or the safety lights at Frontera Park. So that was a big accomplishment for us last year. And Brett and I are always reviewing letters of support and grant applications with Adams County Open Space and Greater Outdoors Colorado. Anything that our committee can do to help support the Parks, Recreation, and Golf Department, to get some of those funds to help support those projects, we'll definitely take that on. And then we had the Veterans Memorial Park grand opening celebration, and that park just turned out to be, really a hidden gem around here, and just a great job with that. So I'm going to turn it over to Brett now.
All right, thank you, Justin. And to continue our highlights, we'll move into 2021, where we had our comprehensive plan, Commerce City 2045. We basically had a brainstorming session of issues and opportunities. Great discussion. And like Justin said, we have one of the biggest groups that we've had in a long time. So we've been able to have some really good conversations regarding issues and opportunities. 2022 CIPP review and input. Some of these include our disc golf that we're looking to add into Parks and Rec and golf. Also our Bison Ridge Park, which hopefully will have some pickleball courts, all-inclusive play structure, and picnic shelters. We welcomed 3 new amazing committee members. They've been great and already jumping in and really helping out and just bringing kind of new perspective to the group. And we have such a diverse and inclusive group that I love to be a part of every month, just because everyone's very interactive and really kind of gives the issues or talks about the conversations that they want to have or their neighbors want to have. So we work collaboratively with the board and commissions on fundraiser events. We are looking at 2 new events in the future where we're going to work with them, and then we're planning a city tour. We've kind of postponed this because of the pandemic, and hopefully 2021 fall we should be able to do that. And then our PRG master plan update, it basically sets direction of the future of what we do and what we really focus on. Next slide, please, Dylan. All right, so we also drafted a resolution modifying the PRG Advisory Committee to update the proposed provisions, and those included, as you see below, advocate for a park, recreation, and golf programs and services that support health and wellness essentials to improve individuals and community level health, access to all people, and provide critical green space that connect people to the outdoors and are beneficial to our environment. And then a resolution to present at our upcoming city council business meeting, which I think that's what this is, right? And next slide, Dylan. So another highlight we wanted to talk about is our last meeting, April 20th, 2021. We reviewed the request to consider renaming of Buffalo Run Golf Course in accordance with Council Policy Number 7 for naming facilities. The Parks and Rec, Parks, Recreation, and Golf Advisory Committee members believe it is important to honor and remember both Detective Kurt Holland and Francisca Dominguez. And the committee would not recommend changing the name of the facility at this time, but we believe that it is important to involve all members of the individuals' families, as well as Commerce City Police Department in determining and moving forward with recommendations to honor these individuals. And next slide, please. I know we might have some questions, but before we go to questions, I just want to thank our two council members, Councilmember Guardiola and Councilmember Hurst, and then also Carolyn and her amazing staff and team. You know, every meeting is so well organized, and they've just been so supportive of our committee. So just want to send out a thanks there, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Councilmember Alan Thomas.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Couple questions. I'm just curious for trails. Does the Sand Creek Trail fall under Parks and Recreation, or is that under state?
Carolyn, I'll let you take that one.
Councilmember Alan Thomas, the Second Creek Trail corridor is operated, maintained by the city of Commerce City.
Okay.
Their Second Creek corridor, actually the First Creek corridor, Second Creek, any of those floodplain pieces belong. Well, most of it belongs to the city. Some is still waiting to be dedicated as development continues.
Okay, thanks. Because I was just curious if, you know, if staff in the rec area could follow up about, I think I've mentioned before at other council meetings, the upkeep on some of those trails. You know, I've gotten a lot of complaints from constituents. So if staff could look into that, because I wasn't sure who that falls under. And then another question I had, does Adams 14 and 27J have a golf team to use where the students can use the golf course, like to encourage golfing? Because I've seen other school districts have golf teams. And, you know, I was hoping eventually when with the COVID restrictions, could that be a possibility, or can they already use the golf course?
Actually, both 27J and Adams County School District 14, Prairie View High School and Adams City High School golf teams, men's and women's, I guess I should say. Teams make use of Buffalo Run. Buffalo Run is their home course, has been since golf was adopted as a sport at those high schools, and Buffalo Run's. So that currently exists.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks, and keep up the good work. Thanks.
Just a quick clarifying question. You did say were you referring to conditions on the Second Creek?
No, I said
Sand
Creek.
Okay, so the Sand Creek Regional Greenway, I'm sorry, I thought you said Second Creek, but the Sand Creek Regional Greenway, Commerce City has a section we own, Denver has a section, and Aurora. So we can certainly follow up, or I can follow up with you later, just if you can be more specific about what parts of Sand Creek.
Great, okay.
My apologies.
That's okay, I'll contact you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Noble.
Thank you, Justin and Brett. That was really well done, and I really appreciate the effort that you put into all of these programs, and that you've been doing this for 3 years. That's really impressive. So thank you for your time that you've devoted to the community. That's really great. So I'm curious about, I know we'll be getting to this later. It is a study session night, so we're technically not voting on a change in your mission, but I'm curious how a change in mission affects whether it's an advisory committee or a commission. I have no issue with making it a commission, but I don't know what the process is in the city as to whether something is an advisory committee or something is a mission, because the previous mission said advise city council, and now the new mission would be to advocate. which I think is great. I would hope you would. So if somebody on staff could help me understand that, that would be great.
Yes, I would like to clarify if I may, Council Member Noble. So, and that was just an expert or little. So what the advisory committee will be proposing, it will be presented to City Council at an upcoming business meeting.
Right.
There's a purpose section within the charter, and then the purpose of the PRG Advisory Committee. That little snippet is just an addition. It does not change. When you see the whole resolution, it doesn't change the fact that they would advise city staff and city council. The purpose also talked about that the PRG Advisory Committee would work in conjunction with the CIP CAC committee, and that committee no longer exists. So we're just updating the purpose section of the charter and existing resolution of the PRG Advisory Committee. It will not change the purpose to advise, and that'll be more clear when you see the full resolution, if that makes any sense.
It does, but I don't have an issue with an advisory committee becoming a commission. I just saw Mr. Sheasley pop up, and
Well,
if you could explain how that happens and what else is entailed in that, and what it means in the grand scheme of things, whether you're a commission or an advisory committee.
And if I could just clarify before Robert answers your question, we're not requesting to change from a PRG Advisory Committee to a PRG commission.
I understand, but maybe we would like to do that.
Okay, go ahead, Robert.
So the council can create boards or commissions under section 11.1 of the charter. You have two created by the charter, the Planning Commission and Board of Adjustment. Otherwise, you create advisory commissions by motion or resolution or by ordinance. You can do that too. And then any other board or commission is created by ordinance. So if you wanted to shift an advisory committee to doing something more, you would have to do an ordinance with 2 readings for it. And so Carolyn, I'll look at what you're doing, and I assume there's no change, but we will check it to make sure it doesn't have to be by ordinance. And then the only thing that limits them is the duties are assigned by council through that ordinance, and they can't perform duties that are assigned to another body through the charter or otherwise by council. So I don't think we're running into that issue here, but that's something to keep in mind as well going forward.
But the Senior Commission and the Veterans Commission are not called Senior Advisory Committee or Veterans Advisory Committee. They're called Senior Commission and Veterans
Correct.
Commission.
They are created by ordinance and they are codified along with a few other commissions, Youth Commission. But then you have others that are created in a more advisory capacity. The Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Committee or Commission being one of those, the PRG one as well.
And is there any more authority, or it's just in the title? It's just a title thing.
No, it depends on what the enabling ordinance for each says. They may do a variety of things. These are not typically spelled out in great detail. For example, Senior Commission begins with an advisory capacity, even though it is codified. But they are otherwise authorized to do other things, but they are largely related to advisory. However, they are also authorized to create information guides and promote resources and host informational events and seminars, which would, I believe, be beyond an advisory committee capacity. Very similar for the Veterans Commission as well, and I believe the Youth Commission there. So it is a little bit more than advising council, which is where your other bodies should exist. They are advising council to taking a future action.
And there is a little bit of overlap with the Senior Commission, probably because there's so many people on the Senior Commission who are involved with the senior recreation, you know, especially Eagle Ridge. Wait, Eagle Point. Okay, sorry about that. I got the two combined. Anyway, so, you know, working together would be really great. But bottom line, you all are doing a wonderful job. And thank you so much for being with us tonight to share what you've been up to.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Hurst.
Yeah, I just wanted to say how much I've enjoyed over the last few years taking part in this with this group. I think we get into some really good conversations, very, very open about, similar to the exercise that we just did where we talked about why we wanted to be joining that committee. And we had people talking about, the impacts in their childhood that similar programs, parks, recreation, golf programs have had on their life. And really, this is a huge part of our city that I think we do excel at. Obviously, there's always room for improvement, but what I heard is that a lot of people utilize these types of programs to seek that quality community for a lifetime. They find that community there. They find that different stages in their life, kids start and can work their way all the way through. One interesting thing about this committee is we have an Adams 14 graduate that started from the beginning and went all the way through the Parks, Rec, and Golf kind of, early childhood all the way through, and now is on our committee. And so it's really cool. He's a new member, start getting feedback from that perspective. And I think that's incredibly valuable to just see that full cycle. And that's part of the quality community for a lifetime that we all seek and talk about often. There's opportunity, here in this group to be able to talk about those things and how we seek to improve on that goal as a city. And so, been really educational for me to take part in this group, and I appreciate their efforts because every time that I attend, again, it's well organized, and the discussions and passion of this group really show me that they are focused on improving and making the city a better place.
Okay, does anyone else on council have any questions? Oh, sorry, Councilmember Grimes.
Thanks, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you guys for your presentation. This might not be the right time and place to ask this question, but I had asked Roger earlier, last week, about putting a memorial at Buffalo or at Bison Ridge Rec Center instead of the renaming at the golf course, in honor of and in memory of Detective Kurt Holland and Francesca, but also for all first responders and police officers. And so I don't know if this is the time to talk about that, but just kind of wanted to put it out there as an idea, kind of in place of the golf course renaming. And then kind of along the same lines, I think there was some discussion about changing the original idea to name Highway 2 kind of an honorary name for former Mayor Ford. And I wonder about renaming it something in the same kind of vein where, we end up with Veterans Park at one end and a memorial at the other for our first responders lost in the line of duty. Something to kind of connect the two. So just wanted to put it out there now and see if this is the right time to ask that question.
I don't want to answer for the whole committee, but we definitely had this good discussion about the decision that was posted tonight, about why we came to the conclusion that renaming the whole golf course may not be the best idea, but there was a lot of good ideas. And I think Councilwoman Grimes, you come up with some more to put on the table. And that's really why the recommendation was to bring the community together, as well as the Commerce City Police Department, to talk about those options, put them on the table, and get them get more collective feedback towards the end result. But similar to your suggestions, Councilwoman Grimes, there was a suggestion about like a nice memorial bench right before the first tee. I think I suggested, but was thinking along the same lines and set up one of the signature holes at 4 and 17. And then someone suggested that Francesca might want a different location, such as Eagle Point or somewhere else in the city that meant something to her and her family. So all of the above, I think, is what this committee was kind of recommending, is that there are good ideas out there, and they recognize, they feel the same passion towards memorializing these two, but just finding a way that the community kind of agrees upon and pushes forward and supports.
Thanks, Councilman Hurst.
Okay, does anyone else on council have questions? Okay. Thank you for your time tonight. We really appreciate the presentation.
Thank you for having us.
All right, so now we will move on to the presentation for property entry for utility work. At this time, I'd like to invite Robert Sheasley, City Attorney, to make.
Hello again. I will jump right into this one. This presentation is coming back before council a few months ago. Councilmember Alan Thomas raised an issue about a utility contractor entering onto some property to do some work, and I needed to get a little bit more background about what council wanted to achieve and to clarify the route you wanted to go so we don't over complexify this issue. If I could have the slide presentation, please. And so the first slide, just really want to get to the point of what is council hoping to do and how much I want to advise on reasonably what we could do here. And I want to make sure I'm hitting the issues in a way that we can actually address and make sure it's council's intention to go down a certain road. So next slide, please. And so I wanted to raise kind of the scenario where you are when a utility contractor or other person comes onto property seemingly without the consent of the property owner. There are two reactive ways to deal with it. One is criminal regulations. Initially, I was going down that path. However, we already have two general areas of law criminally that cover this, and that is trespass and damaging of property. Now, it's important in each case that the person not have the permission to do that, and we'll get into that in a second. Then the other reactive measure is between the property owner and the contractor or the utility, and that's through a civil claim for trespass or for the damaging of the property. The murky area here and why we need to talk through this a little bit together is because of the nature by which a contractor for a utility or the utility itself would be accessing property that you may believe is private property, but they have every right to be there with or without notice through various forms of property rights, primarily through an easement, which is a right to enter onto private property and do something. And it also limits the property owner from doing certain things. And that right can arise from any number of places. Very commonly, it arises from an express agreement, a contract granting an easement. The city council gives those to other entities all the time. It can also happen on a plat. The plats that the city approves frequently includes a general utility easement that has some ill-defined boundaries for use. Typically, those may extend into areas that may be landscaped, may not be. Typically, they'll be under sidewalks a lot of times, we'll see. Part of the issue is the age of these agreements or plats. You'll have property in the northern part of the city where it's very clear what those rights are and where those areas are. But in the southern part of the city, you may have a privately held easement that existed before the city was even incorporated. Or before we started doing subdivision plats. It may exist by operation of law, which is over a certain amount of time, the right to be there and to do things to service what you have in that area exists, whether the property owner underlying it likes it or not. And it can also come up through a service agreement through a utility provider. And in all of those cases, notice may not necessarily be required by those contracts. And we can't change the terms of those contracts as the city council or by the operation of law. And in some cases, if it's not expressly required, we wouldn't be able to require or suggest that there be any notice. The property owner wouldn't have a right against the person entering to do that work. Those easements can also come with an express or implicit right to remove vegetation, structures, fences, anything else that it interferes either with the operation of equipment that is within the easement or their right to access it. And so those are some of the things that we have to consider when we're figuring out what exactly the council wants to address in this matter. So next slide, please. I did go out and reach out to a few of the prominent utilities. I heard back from South Adams County Water and Sanitation and United Power. Each of them were opposed to the council doing anything. I had to tell them I didn't know exactly what council wanted to do here. So to not worry, obviously the suggestion of a special criminal action, they were very concerned about for their contractors and their employees, and for placing police at the middle of what may be a private property dispute. Their opposition also arises from the fact that it would interfere with their ability to provide service to individuals and to the region, not only affecting rights that they may have under easements. So the scope of what the council may do needs to be informed by the fact that there is this strong limit to what we can do on a uniform basis around the city. They were especially wary and wanted me to advise that disrupting their ability to access facilities for inspection or in a way that could hamper their maintenance response, especially in emergencies, could really jeopardize the service to the area. And they wanted me to highlight that the source of their access rights vary. That last sentence was meant to be especially across older parts of the city. And so we have to be attentive to that. And so on the last slide, I've outlined a couple possible solutions. Again, I'm not quite sure what council wants to achieve in this regard because there is a vast area of law that the city is typically not involved with here. And I know council is sensitive to adding criminal regulations or other regulations where enforcement is an issue. And so aside from having one of those reactive policies, I was thinking that there were solutions like this. Council could provide information on the webpage to the community and post contact information for utilities so that when people are concerned, they have a more ready point of contact. Another possibility is for utility easements that the city gets through their plats. The city council could establish a policy in the land development code or separately on requiring notice for those. Now, the problem with that is you're only likely going to be looking at future plats. And if it does apply to existing plats and existing easements, knowing exactly where that notice requirement applies is going to be very difficult to map out on a case-by-case basis and know whether something is in a particular easement and whether the notice requirement would exactly apply. And it likely wouldn't hit on easements that don't exist through platting that were done in the last 30, 40 years. And then the last solution I had, again, not knowing exactly what council wanted to address, was having a non-binding policy stating that the city council's policy is that any person entering an easement on private property should give notice and should publicize the intended access in a certain way by door hangers, by mailing, et cetera. Now, the problem is it's non-binding and we wouldn't be able to interfere with a private contractual right. And so those are broad and likely not satisfactory, but I wanted to get council's feedback to see if this is something we should pursue in any way or what avenue you wanted to go down. Thank you.
Councilmember Madera.
So I guess my question is it possible that they're accessing private property that doesn't have an easement? Like, how do you know there's an easement? Because there's obviously not an easement with me that I signed as a property owner, but there could be something on the land, you know, from 50 years ago when they first put up the lines.
So you're right. Easements run with the land. So you buy a house, you come into whatever easement existed, and it may not show up expressly in your title work as an easement. It may be in the plat somewhere. You may also see it in a service agreement, which is not necessarily an easement, but it could be a license to access your property. And I know not everybody's reading all of their the fine print on everything they do. And so you're right. You would have to do title work and have a surveyor and know specifically that where the property is they're accessing and determine that for your individual property. it's something that city staff are not enabled to do currently or would have the capacity to do. I would say it is something of a fair assumption for a larger utility that if the utility is in a location, that there is a right to be there, given the expense of putting that there. And that's not a guarantee, but over the course of time, their right to be there is guaranteed, even but just by a law.
I think more than anything, it's just the courtesy, right? Because I've came home before and had someone in my backyard, and it's like, who the heck are you? And so just something like that, where if even a door hanger just knocking on the door saying like, hey, I got to access this pole or something, I think that would be something that I would be agreeable with. I don't want to interfere with the utilities. They obviously have to repair lines and winter storms and trim the trees so they don't start a fire. So I don't want to interfere with what they have to do to provide power, but at the same time, just that common courtesy of saying, hey, I'm going to be here, I got to do some work, is that okay? And because I've had several people in my house, usually it's easier to access because there's not a fence, so they can see that there's not a dog or something in there. And so even though they can access the same pole from 4 different houses, they usually go through my house. And I've had some that do knock or say, hey, I got to do some work. And then sometimes there's people that just like go into my backyard, and I'll go out there, and that's where I'm like, I don't know who you are and what you're doing on my property. And so that's kind of where I was at on the situation, just having that courtesy, knock on the door, leave a door hanger or a little sticky note saying that we were here.
Councilmember Ellen Thomas.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yes, I'm kind of along the same lines. There needs to be a policy unless, it's an emergency situation, because I'm in the same, situation, and why I brought this to staff to look into is, especially, when someone just comes to your property also and removes vegetation or structures without even notifying you why or anything, and they just start coming on your property, destroying things. And then at least in that policy, is it possible for something to, if they just come on your property and destroy something, then that needs to be figured out or something too, because then that is when you want to get a law officer involved, because you weren't even notified. And like I said, in my situation, they just came on my father's property and started cutting up a tree that had been there at least 50 years. So I think something like that, if they, that needs to be negotiated also. And they should notify the property owner prior, at least even a week or so, because like when they redid a lot of the streets here in the core of the city, they gave the mailers, etc., to where everyone was on board and they were notified. And I also think too that the contractor needs to be responsible to notify the actual property owner, because a lot of these houses are tenants or renters, so actually notify the property owner at least 2 to 3 weeks in advance and notify them in English and Spanish as to what's going to occur. Because I do think, that there needs to be something to stop these contractors from just doing that. And like I said, same thing like Councilman Madera had mentioned, in the core of the city, we have a lot of telephone poles, and there's one in my backyard, and a lot of them have to come to my house to access the telephone pole for like CenturyLink, Xfinity, etc., and it has gotten to the point to where I've had to put a lock on my fence from people just entering my backyard without permission. And then I have animals myself. And then another time a utility worker left my back fence open. So this is a serious concern. Thank you.
If I can respond to that, I think the quandary we get into, and I was trying to explain, is that establishing a general law with any teeth or requiring any of those things could be contrary to the rights allowed under an express easement that may exist or a service agreement, or that would generally apply by operation of law by the fact that that utility is there. with an easement, there's some right to access a property through the most reasonably available means. If there's no alley access, they would need to cross your property otherwise in some way to access that pole. And so defining a policy that would be enforceable without infringing on existing legal or contractual rights would be very difficult here. And without being able to do so, I would caution council from putting staff or your police department or code enforcement in a position of having to respond to that. Because as I mentioned, these entities, their rights to remove shrubbery, even if it's existed for 50 years, could be absolute and unimpeded by any notice requirement. And that puts the city into a truly civil matter between these entities. If a utility comes on your property within an easement and damages something and doesn't repair it, those are remedies that exist to a property owner at law. There are remedies that exist there at law already that don't involve the city, and that the city couldn't reasonably become involved in, I guess. Certainly a police officer shouldn't. When you have a property owner whose property is burdened by an easement and there's that damage, the person using the easement does have an obligation to repair damage to a certain extent. Replacing shrubbery, though, may not be one of them.
So but not only shrubbery, but then say they didn't give you notice. It could, if we came up with a policy and they didn't give notice, you know, then what rights as a property owner, say we did have a policy where a notice was mandatory, then, you know, what is a property owner supposed to do? You know, at least if possible, because at least they would have had a chance to remove their property or something before someone just comes and starts vandalizing it. So what could we do? What kind of policy could we have to protect that if they didn't give us notice? And
I think it's important to note that that is not, excuse me, I apologize, I cut you off.
It's okay. No, I was finished. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. In that sort of case, it is not necessarily vandalized because of the right to remove it. And I don't know that's the case in every circumstance. Again, imposing a requirement of notice where there is not one is possibly difficult it's difficult across the board unless there is something pre-existing on that. If the city were to establish a policy, and I think it's important when you say policy, because when we have a policy, it doesn't really mean anything. We could pass a law that would have a criminal penalty or potentially a civil fine of some sort. If that civil fine or criminal penalty prohibits something that somebody has a contractual right to do, I would think our ability to enforce that would be very difficult, and to figure out whether a property owner has a particular right related to a utility to write a ticket on that would be very, very time intensive and very difficult. I mean, we can set this up if that is the goal. And that's what I'm trying to figure out here tonight. Does council want to endorse a policy that has some sort of teeth, or is it an educational one, or one that is that the city would work with various utilities to try to get them to put these policies into place while not making it a law? So I just need to know where council wants to go with that.
And I just want to clarify, you know, I think we should be able to work with them, but I don't think people just have the right to come on your property and start doing what they want without even notifying you and trying to negotiate some compensation and telling you ahead of time what they're going to do. And if they're going to just, you know, as we see it, or if that property owner sees destroying part of their property, then some type of compensation and warn you in advance how they're going to compensate you. And if then there's a problem, you know, figure out. So like I said, I realize they need to do what they have to do, but I still think they should have to at least notify the resident and the property owner, and not just start tearing up their property. Thank you.
Councilmember Hurst.
Robert, can I ask for clarification? I don't know if it's simple or not, but what would we consider a utility? I mean, is cable and internet now considered a utility? I mean, in my mind, I think it is, but I don't know by what definition, right? Because I understand electric poles. I understand those are, or telephone poles. Those are really significant but in certain parts of the city too, you just have these little boxes in people's side yards or backyards and things like that that also are accessed. I mean, they knock on my door, so I got, at least I've had that at least a couple times. But I have a dog as well. They leave the fence open. That would be bad news. So it's not that I want to stop that from happening. It's how do you demand at least the respect of coming onto somebody else's property, and that I think is what Councilwoman Allen Thomas was suggesting, is that purely out of respect, that there needs to be some type of communication and follow-up, because gladly I'll keep my dog inside if I knew those times, so on and so forth. My dog will never bite you, but she'll sure look mean when you come into her backyard. And so same type of thing, I'll save you from the angst if you just showed me some respect. And so I think that's, at least in my opinion, I understand utility work, its importance, not just for your house, but for the whole region. And so I'm not trying to impede on that, but also, at some level of respect. I think there's a certain level of emergency that some of that can go out the window. But if it's a planned event, obviously there needs to be some communication.
So I think a couple ways to respond to that, and the complexity of it and the types of utilities are varied. Yes, cable, telecom, gas, electric, when you get your geothermal in, anything that's going kind of above or beyond, I don't know the definition, but above or underground to provide a service within there, within the community. We deal with some of them through franchise agreements. Comcast, United Power, Xcel have franchise agreements, typically don't talk about private property so much because it deals with the public right-of-way. Some of these entities are regulated through the state's Public Utilities Commission. Some have a higher regulation from the Federal Communications Commission that kind of limit some of the regulations we could put on. I do think that having a policy that gets the city to work with each of these identified providers, and I think you can put it on the list of water, wastewater, gas, electric, internet, phone. If you kind of limit it to those utilities, essentially, I think the city has intergovernmental relations capacity and building up that relationship so that we get commitments from people. And I think that's a broader task to do that, regardless of what your easements say, regardless of what your rights are, kind of a commitment from them that they will do X, Y, and Z, and outline that and share that with the community and council. But from the city's own regulatory power, I think it's very difficult to craft something that is enforceable and prosecutable.
I agree. IGA in most situations or a equal document would be the best approach, because again, that's going to allow for some kind of agreements to take place in terms of, like I said, at a certain level of emergency. Tear my fence out, I don't care. Like, if that's what you have to do, for the good, then that needs to happen. But again, if it's a planned event, part of a maintenance project, you can write into that IGA that there's a public outreach, stakeholder input, whatever you want to call it, process that's followed in that situation.
And other components of that, we won't have an IGA with most of those entities. Only one of those, South Adams County, is a governmental entity. And it would be totally voluntary for somebody to do. We'd be talking about kind of understandings and commitments on a softer basis. If it's a city-approved permitting process, that is a condition that could be written into city permits for sure. And so there are different levels that we can do that. There be that outreach. If somebody's got to get a building permit to go and repair something or install something or cut into public right-of-way, maybe part of that is that there be notice to any affected homeowners. But again, it's enforcing that could be very difficult.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Robert, I wonder if the solution is actually simpler than this. With 811 utility notification for locating, any entity that's registered with 811 receives a notification of any projects that require digging. And so I don't think there's specifically a way for homeowners to register at this point. You can certainly register a request to dig, like to plant a tree or something, but I wonder if you could do the same, if somebody could reach out to 811 and ask if there's a way for homeowners to register the way that, say, a company would. Just as an example, as an oil and gas operator, we're required to respond anytime there's going to be digging within a quarter section of an underground line, an underground sales line, flow line, whatever. And the same is true for all other utilities, as far as I know. And so could we investigate that route where homeowners could just register to be notified anytime there's going to be digging within a certain distance of their home?
Yes, we'll look into that one, and if it's viable, I'm sure put that out through some communication.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm kind of along the lines with Councilmember Alan Thomas that it's kind of a respect thing. I know I've been in my house home alone and some people just kind of come into my yard and it freaked me out and I ended up calling the cops. So it becomes a safety issue when they just show up and start like scrounging around and you don't know what's going on, especially if they park their car down the way and you can't see what's going on. So I think if there's any sort of scheduled maintenance, it'd be nice to have some sort of notification that they're showing up. And then if there's some sort of emergency maintenance or emergency problem that's coming up, they at least knock on the door, let people know what's going on.
Councilmember Noble.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So recently it was United Power who sent a notification. They came and knocked on our door and then they went around the side of the house and went through the gate and we had a conversation. So my question is to my colleagues who've had this experience, so Councilmember Madera and Councilmember Alan Thomas and Councilmember Smith, which utilities came into your yards without, or came onto your property without notifying you?
Well, Councilwoman Noble, mine was a lot of times it's Xfinity and CenturyLink. And but Xcel Energy usually knocks on the door very respectful, but it's been those other companies. And then what I found out also, a lot of them are actually subcontractors for those companies.
Yeah, for me, it's primarily Xcel, their contractors, and then Xfinity and their contractors, CenturyLink. So it's a little bit of everything.
I don't remember. I think mine might have been South Adams County Water, but I can't remember.
So at the Water Commission meeting a couple of weeks ago, we were actually talking about this, and the head of South Adams Water brought it up. But it does seem then that we could at least narrow it down to those three and talk to the regional representatives and say that, let them know that their subcontractors have not been respectful and may have been, abused their ability to come onto the properties, and just give them notice that this is unacceptable in Commerce City. I mean, I just don't like to ever hear that anybody is being stepped on here or taken advantage of. It just is really upsetting to me. So we need to tell them that it is unacceptable, in my opinion. You just can't do that. You just really have to go through the same steps that some of the other utilities do, like United Power. United Power takes the time to send out notices and knock on your door and put something on your doorknob. Everything that you're asking for, they do. So it doesn't seem out of the realm of possibility that we can't ask the same of these other utilities, especially if they are behaving in a disrespectful manner. And they ought to know that their subcontractors are doing so, because they might not want to contract with that company again.
So what I'm hearing is a definite desire to respond to this in some way, but I'm not hearing direction on another outcome. And so, but maybe what I'm hearing is the outreach that Councilmember Noble mentioned and others have talked about is the right way to start. Through direct communication, we can write a letter. This gets out of the city attorney's kind of purview a little bit. I'll work with the city manager's office and who he may want to designate to handle this relationship a bit. But to craft a letter outlining the issues, telling them we want to engage with them, and we kind of essentially demanding that they do a few things. Notice in advance, notice to property owners when you have scheduled maintenance or known maintenance through a mailing or a door knocker, direct contact like that. In an emergency, you'll at least knock on the door and leave a notice saying that you had to access the property for whatever reason. And then asking them for their policy, written policies and guidelines they have for their staff and their subcontractors for how you access property, how you engage with private property owners, and what's your policy on property damage, and what's the recourse, so that we can then take that and use that to see if there's anything further the city can do, or disseminate that within the community, if that would work for the council.
Councilman Madera.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Okay.
Councilman Hurst.
Yeah, I agree.
If everybody's kind of good with Roger going that direction, can you like wave your hand or thumbs up? All right.
So for Elliot, as you're writing, look at about 7:54, an hour and 54 minutes into the meeting for the summary and the study session as the action item. Thank you all. I really appreciate the feedback on this. Thanks. I know it's a difficult subject. Nope, you missed, Mr. Hurst. You're done.
Councilmember Hurst.
So I like that approach. I just want to make sure we just keep it as simple as possible, though. Before, maybe I should just ask you straight up: Did we like seek company policy first? Like, does any of them have this policy already? Obviously, Councilwoman Noble called out some actions that make me think they probably have policies similar to that. And I know subcontractors, but I mean, quite honestly, that has to be passed on in contract work. That's pretty basic contract stuff. And so you're representing a greater contract in that situation. And so I just really wanted to seek, like, can we ask if they can tell us what their current policy is and then go from there? Because that seems the best way to ease into this discussion.
I'm not so worried about easing into it. I think they're very accustomed to local governments reaching out. So I don't think we should be shy about that. We're not threatening legal action or anything. They have whole units devoted to government relations. So hopefully they'll respond. A couple of them didn't. United Power, I believe, was in the process of drafting regulations, but didn't share any with me. And I don't believe the Water District had written policies to share with me. So the two that I was able to speak with were not able to provide me anything. But we'll see what we can get here and reach out through the membership that the city has in a utility-related organization to see if other communities and the liaisons from the utilities in there have any feedback to offer.
Yeah, I'd be very interested to hear that, because if they're not a government organization, then we should pressure their boards to have something in writing that we can refer to and start to work with.
Councilmember Ellen Thomas.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I just wanted to add to, Robert, when you do reach out to them, can you express, the serious concerns that the residents have, and, let them know we're really frustrated, and, just like back to my my dog, if someone comes to fix someone else's line or utility line and I lose my pet, which is considered a family member to me, I'm going to be very upset. So can you let them know this is a serious issue in Commerce City?
I think they are familiar with that sort of complaint, and so I hope that they have had a strong policy in place to deal with it and show us something here. Next steps beyond this may be some sort of action of the Public Utilities Commission or otherwise. So there could be a lot more.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, we're going to move on to the presentation for the South Platte Crossing update. At this time, I would like to invite John Borgelli, Management Analyst, to make the presentation.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Mr. Roberts, we have the presentation that we can pull up. All right, thank you for that. I'll be updating you on the South Platte Crossing property that we've acquired. Next slide, please. So two things we'll cover tonight. One, just an overview and update of where we are on this project. And then two, and more importantly, receiving council direction for how we will select a tenant. Last time we talked about council's vision for the space, how we intend to use it, and we landed on this will be a space that the city leases out at low or no cost to nonprofits. And so moving forward with that, we'll need to figure out exactly how we pick those nonprofits that we will let this space out to. So that's what we're going to try to figure out tonight. Next slide, please. All right, so starting with the project status, where we currently are. Next slide. We closed on the property January 28th. We did have some delays along the way, but we got there. And we are currently in progress on the remodel. We're anticipating to finish that up at the end of 2021, which in terms of the timeline, that would put tenant move in then in Q1 of 22. So we'll finish that remodel, and then hopefully, while we're doing that, we'll also be working to get outreach to a potential tenant, get that lease worked out so that the moment we're done with that remodel, they can take occupancy of this space. Next slide, please. So a little bit more detail about that remodel project. Planning on the initial work is underway, so there will be essentially two phases to this project. First will be the initial work, and we're going to get started on, we're starting on that now. That'll be just what we need to do to freshen the space up, get it ready for any use, since we don't know what that final use will be. So there are some repairs that we need to do to the drywall, new coats of paint on the walls, new carpet replacing some of the ceiling tiles, fixing just some of the damage and some of the wear and tear that's in that space, getting it ready. As we get closer, as we start to figure out who those tenants will be and have a better idea of the number of tenants we'll have and the nature of the work that will be done in that space, that's when we can get started on phase 2 and getting it finally finished to fit the needs of the space. So if we have to put up any sort of interior partitions, any sort of furnishing based on council direction for what we'll be providing versus what the tenant will be providing, that will be phase 2, and that will occur later in the year. But we're starting now on those initial things that will have to be done regardless of how many tenants or what use the space will have. Next slide, please. All right, so I'll pause there. Does anyone on council have any questions about the remodel portion of this?
Councilmember Guardiola.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I do. So are we catering to the tenants on how we're doing offices or walls? Because I don't think that was the intention of, because we don't know. What if, nonprofits, I work with a lot of nonprofits, and some make it 2-3 years, some make it 4 or 5. And each time, if they leave our space, then we have to reconsider that space. So I guess my question is, what's the general layout? And I think that's where we should start and see what nonprofits could work there. Another suggestion that when I saw this presentation is, we have a number of nonprofits that work with Commerce City, and I think that's great. But this space for our residents and our nonprofits to be utilized fully, could we direct staff to do a conference room that people could use for meetings, that any nonprofit in Commerce City could use for meetings? I know when I worked at MSU Denver, there's multiple spaces downtown in different offices. I know the Gates Foundation, the Walton family have these office space for nonprofits that you could use for different meetings. Could we add something like that? Or so I guess I'm just confused on what type of construction you guys are going to be doing, how many offices, cubicles, and I think we have to have a clear idea with that before we even pick tenants.
Great question. So I just want to be clear, I might not have been as clear on that. The idea is not that we will custom finish this to whichever nonprofits we decide to let this to initially, and that'll be set. But just that'll give us a better idea. If we know off the bat, we'll have, 2 or 3 or more. If we do need to put up either temporary interior partitions, like the sliding walls, or if we want to be putting in more permanent walls. Currently the space, and I apologize, I don't have a picture of a floor plan in this presentation. I do in a previous one. There's about 11,000 square feet on the floor. That's roughly divided into 2 halves. Each half is roughly laid out the same way. There's a large open area that takes up most of that space on each side. And then there are offices kind of around the perimeter, some of them larger than others, that could potentially be used as a conference room. That's something we've looked into. We could also, if we went forward with some sort of partition system on the inside, having the ability to partition off a conference room or a conference space that we could either have open to any nonprofit or members of the community who needed to reserve some sort of conference space.
So I think what I would suggest, see if colleagues would, is I think we come up with how we want the space, and then the nonprofits could look at that. Because say we wait and this nonprofit needs 3 offices while we only have 4 available or 2 available, and what do? Right? My biggest thing is I don't want to be going back and forth and they'd be like, oh, we need to put this wall up because this nonprofit needs more space, and not be fair to other nonprofits that might just meet a cubicle to meet, right? There are 2 employees or 3 employees. So I guess I'm having trouble with the remodel and without seeing how it's going to look, because there's so many different moving parts to it.
Right. One of the ideas that we're looking into for the remodel is kind of modeling it on the space, a similar space that Adams County has in their Human Services building. It's mostly open concept. They have large rows of cubicles that nonprofits can then reserve, a certain bank, or there are also office spaces. It's kind of analogous to the setup that we'll have if we don't do anything to the space. There are, rows of cubicles and then walls along the outside, and nonprofits can reserve that space. Part of the idea of waiting for that second phase is what councils, and if this is something council wishes to discuss tonight, that'd be great. What council's desires, how much they want to pay for furnishing the space, what will be the responsibility of the nonprofit in terms of desks or cubicles, moving our IT hookups, computers, phones, what will be provided by the city in that space pre-existing, and what will be provided by the nonprofit.
Thank you.
Council Member Madera.
Yeah, so, I think the new kind of age office design is, it's really based around community use. So, my past office, there was hardly any offices reserved for any one person. And rather than them being offices, they were used more as like private conference rooms that people can reserve and then take a call when they needed to. And then they either be, in a cubicle or somewhere else. And so I think, we kind of have to split it up that way, where it's a balance of offices as well as conference rooms that can just be reserved as needed. And really, I think it's just like a space for the community. So, maybe some larger conference rooms where some of these nonprofits can have a board meeting or what have you, and they can reserve that space. So I think that's a little bit more the vision I had for this, is we're going to have, some regular tenants, but it's also going to be a space that can be shared and used by all. So it's not like, well, just because these are the tenants, they're the only ones that have access to these conference spaces. I think that it'd be nice to be able to sign up for it. And, we have entrepreneurs that are in the community that, maybe they're doing some classes on real estate or something to kind of further their business. And a lot of times those people are, they're also looking for space to hold their events. And I think, just having kind of that incubator space here and available to our residents would go a long way just to help further, not only our nonprofits, but our businesses and entrepreneurs as well.
All right, Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. A lot of what I wanted to say was already hit kind of in the form of modular setup, right? That like Councilman Madera was talking about, mix of cubicles and some offices and conference rooms. But what I wanted to remind council of is we also have the Small Business Resource Center in Derby, which is intended more for the entrepreneurial side rather than nonprofit. And so that's another space that we do have available for folks that are looking for a meeting space or a training space as well. So just as a reminder.
Councilmember Noble.
This is a real chicken and egg problem, isn't it? And the other issue is that there's going to be some of these that might need more privacy or security than others might. I know that the kids' health programs are going to have their own floor for that particular reason. Certainly having a meeting room, I really do think that's a great idea, to at least carve out some of the space to have one or two pretty good sized conference rooms in that 11,000 square feet. I think we should be able to do that. And maybe even one of them that has a nice view of the mountains and the inline could be attractive for a lot of different organizations. Then we're going to have the complication of who's going to staff those at night and shut down the space. But okay, that's another night, right, John?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
And thank you all for your excellent points. Not only have you brought up great discussion points, you've also bought me enough time to find the floor plan. So if I share my screen or if I send this to Mr. Roberts, we can get a picture of the floor plan up as we are discussing this. So let me just share. So as you can see, there are two open areas. There are about a dozen offices total, and there's one space that could be used as a conference room there. In terms of privacy, Councilman Noble, to your point, these rooms here are all small, and other spaces, similar spaces I've seen use those for meeting with clients to preserve those privacy. So you have one-on-one meetings in these spaces here. It's partitioned off from everything else. These two halves can be separated from each other depending on the intended use for each side. We are getting all of these doors rekeyed. So depending on who is in what space, we can allow varying levels of privacy within the space as it's currently configured. And I'll make that a little bit bigger. I see you leaning in there.
Is there a restroom in there?
Yes, ma'am. There are two, one on each side.
Okay, and what are the big spaces on either end?
These here and here. On the left and right side?
Correct.
Those are just open space. If we were to have cubicles, that would be the best place to put them. You could have banks of cubicles there. We could also have those temporary partitions there if we want to be able to divide the space if it were to be more of an incubator style space where the number of occupants would be changing more regularly, and we'd be able to reconfigure the space a lot more quickly than if we actually put up interior walls, which I don't think is our intention at this point.
And the west side will be very coveted and good for views, I suppose.
Great views, looks out on the mountains, the Denver skyline, the end line.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great space.
Thanks.
Councilmember Hurst.
So I heard your total square footage just because of the kind of the center portion. Can you give me a rough estimate of what you think this could be broken down to in halves and quarters? Like, the reason I say that is if we're talking about more security and kind of open space to do meetings, it seems to me it's a pretty big space. It can be probably broken down in several different ways, but if half of it was for, or even 2/3 of it was for a couple different tenants, if you will, and then 1/3 of it was left for the community, it seems like there'd still be quite a bit of space for everybody involved.
Yes, I don't have exact square footage for each of the rooms. That's something I can provide though. But all of the doors that you see here, we're getting those rekeyed. So everything will be on a separate key. So depending on how we want to divide that space up, everything can be kind of compartmentalized from each other.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we kind of called out that it's a pretty significant amount of square footage. So if we're talking about small nonprofits is really what I was getting at, is we might not necessarily be talking about 2 or 3 tenants. We could be talking about more than that, 5 or 6 or something like that, and still have a good amount of space for them to operate because of the size of their, small organization. And so we heard from some specific organizations that had interest in this building. And I'm just trying to think with them as what, like if we decided to go down that path, what else would be options there? And I think it's a fairly big floor. And so just want to point that out when you're looking at it on the map. It might not highlight that level of space, but it is a pretty significant size.
All right, Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. John, are we engaging like a design firm to help with this remodel, or is this being done in-house?
The current steps are being done in-house, just the freshening everything up. When we get to that second phase, when we're actually starting to, and that could come sooner if this is the discussion we're having now, about exactly what that will look like, depending on the complexity of the project, that is something that we could contract a design firm to do. What we're currently looking at with it being a simpler remodel currently, we're keeping it in-house.
Okay, I was just thinking, if we're doing this and we want to make it great and available to our community and our nonprofits, to me, it kind of makes sense to hire this out to a design firm who specializes in this type of remodel and, have them bring us 2 or 3 ideas, kind of like we did the other night with the Mile High Greyhound park redevelopment with that firm. It just seems to me that they may have a bigger vision for the whole floor, as a whole, and how to kind of divide it and make it accessible to 2 or 3 or 4 different groups, as well as have that community space. And I personally would like to look at those options as opposed to kind of try to conceptualize it.
Councilmember Madera.
Is this the existing layout?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm just seeing like a lot of wasted space, it seems like. I feel like you can probably add 10 more offices and, a big conference room. The other thing is, have we reached out to some of the nonprofits around and just see, what their needs are in terms of space and, what they would like to see if they have like the perfect, shared office situation?
Not to that level of specificity. We have started reaching out to nonprofits, telling them that this space will be coming. It will be available if they're trying to gauge their interest in it. But to how much space they will need, and that more specific level and what they'd really be looking for, not yet.
Yeah, I think we should do that. We should reach out and see, what do you need? You need big conference rooms. You need, small kind of shared conference rooms where you can take a call or, meet with a small group of people, and then just kind of go from there. Because like Councilmember Noble said, it is a little bit of the chicken and the egg. You don't really know what your layout is until you know what's going in there. So at least if we can just reach out and see what needs are, maybe we can see some similar needs and kind of work towards addressing those themes.
Councilmember Hurst.
Got to do it once a meeting. Left my.
Okay, if you want to continue, John.
Yes, ma'am. Let me stop sharing my screen, and if Mr. Roberts will pull the presentation back up. All right, so moving to the second part, either the chicken or the egg, depending on which we're talking about. So the space will be ready for tenants to move in beginning of 2022. And again, our goal is to be working through actually finding these tenants and getting them under lease and that part of the negotiations during 2021, such that when the remodel is complete, we'll be ready to get those tenants in as quickly as possible. So council will have to determine the method for selecting tenants, and that'll be based on criteria also that council develops, how the selection process will work. Based on that criteria and that direction from council, staff will then negotiate the lease agreements, which will be brought back to council to approve. And so some of those key factors that we'll have to think about are rent in the lease, how much we want to charge. And that can be based on, how much we will provide in that space in terms of how far we'll go with that remodel, what we're actually providing in terms of infrastructure or IT, AV equipment in that space, and how much of that we then would want to recoup in rent from the tenants. Next slide, please. So there's some considerations to bear in mind as we think about the selection process and how we'll actually figure out who goes into the space. We obviously want to use this to further your vision and to make sure that the city is involved in this area. It's great potential for development. There'll be a lot of really cool, really good things for the community going on there. We want to make sure that the city is deeply involved in that. We also want to make sure that we're maintaining a good relationship with our nonprofit partners as we figure out who goes in there. But legally and from a compliance standpoint, council has pretty broad latitude in actually making that final selection of who will go in the space. There aren't too many legal restrictions around that, and I'm sure that Mr. Sheasley is turning bright red as I'm giving you not legal advice, but pointing you in that direction. Next slide, please. So some options before you tonight about how we'll move forward with the tenant selection process in brief here, and then each of the next slides go a little bit more into detail about how it would work. Either council will pick the tenants. We could put it out essentially for an RFP or have each of these nonprofits apply, or we could entirely outsource this selection process to a third party, to a property management company. Next slide. So some pros and cons on having council, to say, here are the 3 nonprofits we would like to see in the space. It gives council the most control over the project, and it shortens the timeline up, for you guys to meet together and discuss who you'd like to see, and then give that list out. That won't take very long. On the other hand, though, it doesn't give every organization equal chance. It's just based on your discussions, and that could potentially damage relationships with some of our nonprofit partners if you pick X over Y or A over B. Additionally, while this does shorten the timeline, time is on our side in this. We have through the end of 2021 to reach this decision. So while this would shorten up that timeline, the timeline is kind of dictated by the remodel, and that will take probably until the end of this year. Next slide, please. So option B would be some sort of an RFP or an application process. Council would set the criteria. Here's what we're looking for from applicants. Here's how we'll make our decision, and then we'll work, with our contacts, council with their contacts to get this information out and to solicit these applications. On the upside, this will be a very transparent process. Just as if we're going to bid for any other project. And it'll allow each organization to make their own case, whether that's in writing or if they present directly to council, however that process ultimately works. It is a longer process, but as we just discussed, time is on our side. So while that is a downside of this, it's not as big a downside as some of the others. Next slide, please. And then finally, we could outsource this to a third-party property management company. A lot of these companies do offer tenant placement as a service. It would be good because it avoids the appearance of favoritism. It's a neutral third party who would be making these selections. It also minimizes the time that's invested in this project. It doesn't take up staff time or council time to make this decision because we simply tell someone else to go out and do it. Downside though, council, if this space is designed to further council's vision, council wouldn't be having that influence in the selection process. Obviously they'd bring back something for your final approval, but you wouldn't be as involved in the process throughout. Again, time is not that critical factor in this, and also there would be some cost associated with hiring a company to go out and do that tenant placement process on our behalf. So those are the three options, options A, B, and C, that we'd be looking for direction tonight, as well as continuing this discussion of the remodel. Pause here for questions.
Councilman Madera.
So for, I think it was option B, would that be similar to how we do like the QCF and for the grant program where, they have an RFP and we'd have the QCF or kind of an independent board or commission do the selection based off of the criteria that we set?
It could, if council wants to make the selection as well, it can. That's its prerogative. Again, there are a few restrictions on what council can do in this process. So if that is something where you would want an independent board or commission to be the jury in this process, we could make that happen. If you want to review these and make the decision yourselves, we could do that.
I mean, I think it makes sense to take council bias out of it, and it makes sense to just use the Quality Community Foundation as, that independent review, because they're already doing this with grants. And I feel like this kind of falls into the same kind of realm, and, they're familiar with a lot of these nonprofits, and, they award, dozens of grants every year. So I don't see why it would be that far of a stretch to have them kind of review the applications and come up with their recommendations and go about it that way. Personally, I don't think council should be making the selections at the end of the day. We don't want to interfere with those relationships that we built over the years and have, someone feel slighted. And at least this way we can just, kind of get it down to the merit-based selection.
Councilman Guardiola.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yeah, I was looking at option B. I think taking us out of there, and then the cost of getting a third party, and I think the QCF would be a great committee. They gave over 29 nonprofit grants this year, right, stemming from $1,500 to $7,000. So I think getting them involved in kind of this process takes out a lot of the bias that council would have, or even staff might have. So I would definitely go with option B to make it fair for everyone.
Councilmember Ellen Thomas.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I was just along those same lines. I prefer, option B. But I was curious to, do we know approximately how many nonprofits might be able to actually use the space on the floor, or we don't know that yet?
That's the chicken and the egg, ma'am. How many are in the space would depend on the remodel. The remodel depends on how many we want in the space. I think at a certain point, if council just wishes to give direction and say, we want to figure out the remodel first, and then we'll figure out how many tents we want to put in the space, we'll go that way. If council wants to do it the other way around, we can do it that way. Nothing is yet set in stone. These timelines are still fairly flexible with what we can do. But I think that is a good point that council's raised tonight and something we should address after we discuss this.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Noble.
Thanks. So I was involved with a startup nonprofit. I was head of it. I wasn't the founder. And then we converted to a real nonprofit before I left. And we were in a space that was provided by the owner of a building. So I'm very familiar with these buildings that have nonprofits in them. We haven't really talked unless I'm not recalling, as to whether these spaces will be free or there will be costs involved. And then secondly, we need to figure out some sort of timeline. I agree that the foundation seems like a great idea. That we need to have some sort of time frame for these organizations so that they have reoccurring, that you revisit the agreement for them to be in that space, so that if a nonprofit is pretty much defunct but is taking up space, that kind of thing. We're really getting into unusual territory here, but since we're on this path, I think those things need to be built into it also, that we have a framework for these agreements, because there will be some nonprofits that were just babies like mine was. It needs that kind of support until it can spin off on its own or find someone else who wants to underwrite rent forever. Thanks a lot, John.
Thank you, ma'am. We had previously discussed very roughly how that cost would work. We had arrived on it would be below market value. And then we said we would revisit that as we got closer and as we had a better idea for the use of the space and the full costs associated with that. The intent, though, was to try to minimize the cost to the nonprofits and provide this as a community resource. The exact terms of the lease, including the length of that lease, is something that would be subject to council's direction as staff negotiates that lease agreement with the nonprofit. If council wishes for it to be 1 year or whatever the period that is, or whatever criteria council deems fit for that lease, we will negotiate.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I agree council shouldn't have the final say in which tenants go in here, but I tend to lean towards option C over B, just because if we have tenants moving in and out more frequently, I think the length of time it would take to replace those tenants through option B might be a con for me. Whereas if you have a property management company, that could potentially happen more quickly and make better use of the space more quickly when tenants come and go. So I would lean towards C.
Okay, so John, it looks like you have some direction, though. Most of council's leaning towards B. And maybe to Councilmember Grimes' point, maybe if this does go through QCF, maybe it's something that they kind of come up with, like, okay, a list in order of who they would move in to that space if someone moved out.
Based on all of the applications, create a list. The top however many will be the first ones in, and then other people can apply on the list and they'll just continually re-rank it. So we'll always have people.
Yeah.
Understood. And we have a couple more slides, just some next steps to discuss as well. But I think before we get into that, even if we don't have the full discussion tonight, I think it's important that we at least kind of see where council is on the remodel first, figuring that out, and then using that space to dictate how many people we will have in that space, or if we want to figure out first who will be in that space and then figure the remodel out around that. And just to see where council is on that. If you do want to just kind of continue on, I know it's getting late. we can also bring that back for a later discussion. It's not immediately time sensitive.
Councilmember Madera.
Yeah, I think, you know, the first step is going out and kind of getting feedback from some of the nonprofits that we know and work with on, you know, what the needs are for space. And then, you know, once we have a little bit better idea, I think you build out the space, do the remodel, and make it to where it's as kind of encompassing to everyone, and then we can fill it after that. So, you know, I think it's just all about maximizing the space that you have and being able to provide space for the most people, and you know, have those kind of community type features where you're not completely locked into just you know, one configuration.
Councilmember Guardiola.
Yeah, and I think with that, just for the application is asking the nonprofits, how much space do you need? What's your wish list? Something like that, because I think even with rent, you could have an organization that has a $2 million budget to an organization that has a $20,000 budget. And rent is going to be different. I mean, the $20,000 nonprofit might be for, just for example, a sports club or something that's doing here in Commerce City. How are we going to expect them to pay for something that's a $2 million with 5 staff members? So I think when you go out there to gauge what would wish list be, what would ideal rent be, I would say though, you know, voting on this project, keeping rent as minimal as possible for these nonprofits. I think that's something that I know I voted for, that I don't want to charge them where they're focusing on rent and not what they're doing in our city. So but I think when you gauge it, what kind of space would you like? How many offices? Could you do cubicles? You know, how many people do you have? I think that, and then that's when you come back and maybe you guys use that for the remodel.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. You know, as far as rent goes, I'd really like to see some sort of formula that uses their annual budget, number of employees, something like that. That way it's adjustable, you know, if they are in a better place financially, or if they need more space than somebody else does, it's kind of customized to the individual, and still, you know, below market rate. I'm on board with that. I just think that rather than, you know, kind of a flat rate, we need to look at size and annual budget.
Councilmember Hurst.
So if we're talking about reduced rate, which I think we always have when we talk about this building, and if we were going to charge rent, I'd like to see, at the very least, we've talked about this, you know, when we talk about supporting nonprofits in the city through other means like we have in the past. I know Councilman Guardiola and I have both talked about having them show what they do in our community. To be honest, you know, we're using taxpayer funds to fund this when we bought it, to maintain it. And so I have no problem helping every nonprofit out that we can, but we have to see the value in our community as well. So, you know, showing that, I don't know what the number is, but let's just say 50% of the work that you do is actually in Commerce City or Adams County within the Commerce City border. If you can, you know, show more than 50%, then you can have an even further reduced rent. But if it's only 30%, you know, it's the impact to our city that we're also trying to gauge, in my opinion. And so I think everybody's ideas are very good, and I agree with them. I just want to make sure that we're helping those that are helping our community, and that's why we are willing to give this reduced rate. It's a good location. It meets all of our goals, I think, when we passed this and actually purchased it. but I really wanted to make an impact in our community and be a good place, good resource for everybody in this community.
Okay, do you still have more slides, John?
A couple more, and we can get through those pretty quickly. It's just some follow-up and next steps. Next slide, please. So in terms of potential partnership and that beginning networking that we're doing, and we'll expand on this to include exactly what kind of the wish list or what the need for these are. Staff has already met with C4, the Commerce City Community Campus Alignment Group. It's a network of community nonprofits, particularly focused on developing wellness infrastructure in the community. Partner organizations, and there's a list at the end of the slide of the partner organizations associated with C4. Have purchased floors of the building or will be renting space from the Urban Land Conservancy and also operating within the building. Their desires to kind of see this area transformed into, you know, a place, a central hub for human services in the community. And so we will be working with them both to get the word out and also, you know, for networking, trying to see if these are people who'd be interested in applying for use of the space and to gauge their needs. Next slide, please. Did that. Next slide, please. So future steps. Next steps we will have will be criteria for tenant selection. So we've kind of discussed the method by which this will occur. And now council will have to, we'll bring this back at a future meeting, discuss exactly what that criteria will be on which these are graded. And then staff will work with council based on that to finalize that, and we'll utilize the QCF board to actually make these selections. And then as we continue with this remodel project, we'll continue to keep you updated and seek additional direction as necessary. I see we have some hands up.
Yep. Councilmember Hirsch.
No, I'll do it 2 times. Sorry.
Councilmember Alan Thomas.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. John, I was just curious because isn't C4 already in the building?
Yes, ma'am. Some of the partner organizations are in that building already. There are more organizations associated with the group who might like to be in the building as well. They're trying to centralize as much as possible, make it as easy as possible for residents to have access to all of the resources that they need.
Because that's my concern. Like I said, when you go to their website, it shows they're already in the building. So I'm just trying to figure out why would we let them go to that area on our floor. But, you know, I would hope that we would reach out to other nonprofits that aren't already in that building. And then I think, you know, like on slide 7, he said if it's finished by the end of 2021 and the tenants can start moving in 2022, you know, I think we should start developing criteria now sooner than later, so we actually know, you know, who can get part of that floor. But like I said, if C4 is already in that building, I think we should reach out to a lot of other nonprofit organizations to give them a chance to get a part of that floor as well.
Yes, ma'am. We will cast as broad a net as possible when looking for applications. They had reached out to us about the space, and that kind of sparked that initial dialogue. And so that's where that kind of came from. And some of their partner organizations, there are a number of organizations associated with them. Some of those organizations are already in the process of purchasing or renting space in there, but certainly not all of those organizations are.
Okay, because like I said, especially reaching out to several other nonprofits that are local. There's so many not already in the building, and if they're already in the building, I'm wondering, is there a cost difference why they're wanting to come to our floor? So I'd like to know all of that too. If they're moving, if they're already in the building and then they want to move to our floor, then why are they switching? So I'd like to know that as well later on.
So it's not just one organization. They're kind of an umbrella organizing coalition, if you will, for several different distinct nonprofits that operate under that umbrella. So some of those distinct organizations, Kids First Healthcare is one of them, has purchased their own floor for use on that space. But other parts of this, they call themselves, I believe, an alignment group that aren't in this area now and kind of synergize well with each other. are the ones who are seeking the space. It's not because they're trying to see where they can get the best price necessarily on the real estate, because all of these different organizations that work together and cooperate with each other a lot would all like to be in the same space.
Yeah, like I said, I researched all that on their website, but I'm just hoping, like I said, you guys reach out to other council members of other nonprofit, not just those ones already in the building and the ones with C4. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. We will do everything we can, social media, every avenue we have for engagement to try to cast as wide a net as possible and help as many organizations as we can.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Guardiola.
Thank you. And I just wanted to make a comment. One of the reasons we looked into this property is because the human services from Adams County left, and our residents can't go to the one on 120th and Pecos. So I would like staff to really look at talking to Adams County and maybe having a satellite cubicle or office for some of those services at our residents, because when we did the survey, our residents says the biggest barrier to get their services was transportation. And we bought this building or this floor. So I would like to see if you guys could talk to Adams County, because I look at WIC, and WIC was in that building before it moved to 120th. Early Child Partnership was in that building before it moved. So when I'm looking at these organizations that you put on this slide, I think it just brings up more of how could we partner with Adams County to have satellite offices for our residents don't have to drive or take the bus or wherever to 120th and Pecos, especially for the food stamp services that was there. So if you guys could reach out to Adams County, because that was the real reason why we bought this. I think it's great what we're doing with nonprofits, but the real reason was our residents lost services because they moved. They went to 120th and Pecos. So maybe sitting down with Adams County and seeing what services that they could still provide from a small cubicle or satellite office, and maybe they do something services every Monday. The food stamp people are there for our residents to come to. Every Tuesday, WIC is there, and it could be the same office that Adams County could rent, or we could make an agreement with. So I just don't want to lose focus that I think it's great. We're going to be helping tons of nonprofits, and they help our community. But the real reason this came up is because our residents reached out to us, and they didn't have those services down the street or in the city anymore. So if you could reach out to Adams County and see, I think that would be a good thing too for our residents.
We certainly will. Thank you, sir.
Councilmember Noble.
Yeah, that was, I noticed that on the slide, and it kind of got skipped over on the human services aspect. So that would be good. Now we know though that Adams County is going to have 2 floors in this building still. So we need to ask them what they're going to do with those 2 floors. It's possible that also workforce development would be willing to send someone over a week or, a couple of days a week to help people as well. All sorts of different agencies that could do that. And WIC does require that you work for your food stamps. So being able to have a place where people could come that's nearby instead of having to travel all the way to Pecos would be important also. There's a lot of great options, and we just need to explore all of them. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am.
Are there any other questions? All right. So I think you have some direction, John, to move forward in for tonight.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you,
right.
everyone, for your time and for your direction. And we'll be back to talk about this more in depth at a later date. Thank you all.
All right. So at this time, we'll move into reports. We'll start with Interim City Manager Roger Tinklenberg.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I need to read the items from my computer screen, so I won't be looking at you 100% of the time, so I apologize for that. But just to let you know some of the things going on, since we've had the last opportunity to meet, I've been in meetings with two possible hotel developers, mainly just providing them information and answering their questions about the redevelopment site. And so we'll see if they truly do want to engage and find or explore this further with us, at which point we'll involve more of you. 120th Avenue met again with the developer regarding that joint project. And basically we're trying to resolve a sewer relocation issue, which is holding up the project right now. And in terms of Commerce Place on 104th Avenue by US 85, we met with the developer again regarding annexation and the 104th Avenue design west of US 85. In terms of diversity and inclusion, a couple of us met with a consultant regarding minority business preferences. And I've asked finance to review the procurement policy, but that'll have to wait until the audit is finished. And the 2022 budget is partially underway so that they have the time to be able to focus on it. And then E470, a number of us on the staff met with the E470 staff regarding the joint planning process. They are planning to widen E470 all the way up to 104th Avenue. And so we were discussing what that looks like and trail connections and all of that type of thing. Triangle Logistics, which is CA Ventures. We had a presentation to council previously on that. We met again regarding the financing for the project and explored why it's necessary to have both the URA TIF available to it and the Metro District financing. We anticipate providing more information to council and the CCURA board in May. Par 3 golf expansion. We met with Oakwood representatives regarding a proposed Par 3 expansion to the golf course. And so trying to work out some of the details that we can bring to you for your input and decision ultimately. Another update that sort of indirectly affects us, but Adams 14 School District experienced a COVID-19 outbreak in a couple of their schools. And so they've had to go back to remote learning. And so that's of concern. And it just confirms my decision to stay the course in terms of our opening of facilities at this point yet. And then you all are invited to a quote unquote barn raising. That's for the Stead School. It happens on Wednesday at the 28th at 10:30 to 11:30 in the morning. In terms of community development, our chief building official is here and working. His name is Brian Foley. So happy to report that. Glad that he's here. And then comprehensive plan. Again, I mentioned this before, but expect the planners to reach out to you for your feedback on the engagement and long-term vision. And then they're also working on incentives for the participants in the next outreach effort. Economic development, there's a seminar coming up on May 6th that is regarding homelessness and the Derby businesses. They've been experiencing some additional problems with homelessness. And so this will be May 6th, 3:30 to 5 o'clock. And you can meet with them virtually or at the Small Business Resource Center. That's on 7270 Monaco Street. And then just a reminder again, the federal PPP lending has been extended to May 31. So businesses that need assistance, basically covering payroll and that type of thing, that deadline is May 31. Finance department, they have the annual audit going on, and so that's underway right now. Police department, in terms of the trailer parking enforcement, they have issued over 200 citations to large vehicles and trailers that are parked on streets. Public Works, We just received Federal Highway Administration approval to advertise for the replacement of the 112th Avenue Bridge over the Fulton Ditch. That's the one that's just north of Bell Creek. So that's it for me, unless there's any questions on any of those items.
Doesn't look like it. We'll move
All right,
on.
thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Move on to Robert Sheasley, City Attorney.
Thank you. Just very briefly, a council member asked me about food truck parking and parking on driveways or yards. I am confirming with code enforcement that would be responsible for enforcing that, but it's my understanding that, well, first off, there was no change in under the recent ordinance in how we handle parking on private property that would affect that. So anybody that's getting questions, people with specific questions should reach out to neighborhood services or code enforcement rather, to confirm. If it is not greater than 1 ton in carrying capacity, it can park in a driveway under the city's rules. There may be other HOA restrictions. Otherwise, a vehicle like that would need a permit to park on private property. That permit doesn't address parking on city streets though. Parking on yards is typically not allowed at all. It has to be parked on an approved surface unless it's a property in an agricultural area. So we'll get more information, but I wanted to share that I had now. Thank you. That's all I had.
Okay. Are there any other council members wishing to make a report? Councilmember Noble.
Thank you. I mentioned that we had a water commission meeting. At that water commission meeting, I think the interesting part that came, 2 interesting things came out of it for me. One of them is that they're putting in a new water pipe between Highway 2 and Chambers, basically, and it will run along the electrical towers. The other is that they do not do TDS. And the reason they're doing water softening, but they're not doing TDS, which is for anything other than calcium. And the reason that is because you actually wind up with a sludge or this byproduct that you have to put somewhere. And the typical way to put it somewhere is by injection well. And they won't do injection wells in this area because of Commerce City's history. And then there was also a fire commission meeting last week. The fire department station 1 is on track and moving forward. They're not looking at a first quarter opening now, maybe a little bit later than that, but they are excited to be making that progress. And they're looking, they're in the process of buying the animal shelter for a training center. And there may be an opportunity for the city in there for some shared space that we may be hearing about in the future. So that would be good as well. Also, I just wanted to let you know that I have been invited to participate in an environmental justice news conference on Wednesday regarding the Suncor 5 permit. I won't be speaking on saying anything beyond what the city has already said in any documents, and anything else I would express clearly as my own opinion. And the final is that I'm going to submit this as a study session request on a form because of this meeting that's happening regarding homelessness in Southern Commerce City, or that may be impacting businesses. And that's something that we really haven't dealt with as a city council. And it seems to me that that requires our discussion and policy regarding what we're going to be doing about homelessness. It would be really interesting to hear from the new homeless navigator also to find out what she sees as her role and what she'll be doing. I've heard that there's been a lot of movement in Denver that they're moving homeless folks out of Denver. So that may be why we're having a particular uptick, and it certainly requires some sort of regional effort And I hope we can get to that too. Thanks.
Councilmember Alan Thomas.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I just wanted everyone to be aware, and I thought it was pretty upsetting news that the newly opened Starbucks in the core of the city right there off of Vasquez, across the street from the Wendy's, is really suffering from business. They already had to cut their hours from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. only now. And I think it's just really sad. So I just want to encourage, everybody, if they can reach out and show their support, because they just opened and they're already having to cut staff. And, I just hope there's some way, all the residents and council and the Mayor Pro Tem, everyone can give them support and get, maybe possibly if we can even, if staff can see if it's possible to maybe have them like a grand reopening or something to try to get them more business, because I would hate to see them close and they haven't even been there a full year yet. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I had a meeting last week, introductory meeting with a representative from Senator Hickenlooper's office. He just wanted to reach out, kind of talk about what are some of the most pressing issues for Commerce City, and let me know that they want an open dialogue with their communities, and they're looking at regional efforts to help support even some things like homelessness. And so really good conversation there. If anybody else has an opportunity to visit with Senator Hickenlooper's office, I would highly recommend it.
Okay, doesn't look like we have any other reports. I don't have anything to report. So at this time, we will adjourn to the ECAGID, ERAGID joint meeting. I'm going to call the ECAGID and ERAGID joint meeting to order. Tonight's meetings will be held jointly in the interest of time. Roll call motions and votes will be taken only once, but recorded in the minutes for each board separately. Can I ask the secretary to call the roll?
Chair Huseman, Vice Chair Frank.
Present.
Board Member Madera.
Present.
Board Member Alan Thomas.
Present.
Board Member